We're live, Alexander. No intro.
No intro, actually. And first we've done of these for a while. I should say I've been away from London for some of the time, and yesterday I had a tooth extracted, so that wasn't very wisdom tooth extracted.
So you're much wiser. Is that possible?
Oh, I'm sure. You know, the sort of mind expands with the more teeth you lose. So no doubt I will be wiser, but still.
Yeah. Usually the wisdom teeth are taken out at a young age before they even come out. Usually.
No, it didn't happen with me for many complex reasons, and now I'm afraid they're starting to assert themselves. I can put it like that.
Some small talk as we wait for people to join us in the live stream. How's everyone doing out there? It's great to have all of you with us for a call-in show. We were going to do it yesterday, but as Alexander said, something came up. The dentist came up, but we are here today. We are here today because we wanted to do a call-in show because it has been a while, but it's been hard. I mean, summer, everyone's, moving around and going places, and the call-in shows, we do need to kind of be settled into our
routine,
in our studios, I guess.
And our studios, absolutely, exactly.
Our rooms, so that we could take care of the calls and have everything in order. So thank you everybody for joining us wherever you are in the world. Kalispera, Athena. Good to have you in Greece. Good to have you from the US, from Australia, from Canada, from Serbia, from London, from all over the world. Italy, Sweden. Awesome. Great. We have Valley S with us. Valley S has opened up this live stream with a $20 super chat. Valley S is moderating as well. Thank you, Valley S, for everything that you do. We have LH from Spain with us as well, Alexander. And we have Zariel, I believe, is in the house. I did see Zariel somewhere in the live stream.
Wow.
I believe Zariel is there. Yes. We have Stephen from Hong Kong with us. We have Texas. We have Montreal, Melbourne, Norway, Nigeria, St. Louis, Switzerland, Jordan. Wow. Great audience. Best community on YouTube. Let's talk geopolitics. Alexander, there's a lot of stuff we could talk about, but let's leave it to the people to give us a ring. Let me put the link for the call in down below. Guys, hit that like as you enter the room. As you enter the building, smash that like. The like helps the YouTube algorithm recognize us because many times it doesn't even share our videos out with our subscribers. Many times it just unsubscribes people because it decides to do such a thing. I am putting the call-in link right now, and let me just put one more link in there. Alexander, how are things in London? Freedom Day, what a bust that was, huh?
Well, it's an absolute bust. I mean, it completely flopped. Even the Daily Telegraph, which is one of the government's most fervid supporters in the media, basically admitted as such. And I mean, it became particularly surreal with a very bizarre press conference which Boris Johnson gave from the safety of Chequers. That's the Prime Minister's country residence. It was done by video link to another room because, of course, he is isolating. And, of course, all over the place, you see the public transport companies continue to insist, for example, that people must wear face coverings when they go on trains or buses. I don't think it's made any significant difference to life or how people live their lives. I think that things are much the same as they were before. Now, of course, it may change, and we shall see.
All right. I've also got the locals live streaming simultaneously. I don't know how that's going to work out, but let's see.
Okay.
Let's see how it all goes. Alexander, let's bring in our first caller. How about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Give us a ring. Let us know what's on your mind, and let's talk a little bit. Try to keep your calls focused. We do have a queue of people waiting to join in, so keep your calls focused, and hopefully we'll have good conversations. So let's bring in Marklin. Marklin, are you ready to join the stream? I'm going to bring you in. I see you got a mug as well.
Now, coffee tastes much better from this mug.
Excellent. Yeah, I find it so. Thank you. I find it so too. I can't drink coffee at the moment because because of my tooth having been removed. But thank you, Marklin.
Marklin, what's on your mind?
A special vote for thanks to you both for your Herculean efforts in bringing these news items to us. And they've made up for a lot of shortcomings of the mainstream media. And do I have a question? Yes. How do you think this crisis in the West, because that's what it amounts to, how do you think that's going to pan out, given the crazy things that have happened so far? How much crazier do you think, gentlemen, that it's going to get?
A lot crazier before people come to their senses. I think eventually they will, because there's a limit to how long you can keep this going without things really starting to unravel and people getting fed up and tired of it. But I think for the moment, all the momentum is in one direction, and it's going to get an awful lot crazier indeed. And I don't have any doubt about that. And if you look at some of the statements that have been coming out of the US from the White House over the last couple of hours, really some very remarkable comments made by the president about inflation and about how spending more money is going to reduce inflation, which is a new idea. But I mean, a lot worse before they get better. They will eventually get better because, as I say, people come to their senses and they become tired. But for the moment, the momentum is wholly in one direction.
Right.
Any other comments or questions, Marklin?
That's it.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Thank you to your other viewers and listeners. But I'm glad I got through.
Yeah.
And once again, enormous thanks and appreciation for everything over the last few years. You've taught me so much. It's truly amazing. Truly amazing, gentlemen.
Originals, a collector's piece.
And many thanks.
Thank you, Marklin.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
All right, great call. Thank you, Marklin, very much for that. We have Alan Watson, who I'm going to add into the stream. Alan, are you ready, Alan?
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Alan, loud and clear.
Really good to see you. Really good to see you once again. I liked you. I wish I was in Limassol with you the other day, Alex. It looked fantastic. Anyway, what I'm going to say, lots of things. I'll keep it brief. Lots I want to talk about, but I'll keep it brief. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting last week in Tajikistan. What do you think is going on there? I feel that with India and Pakistan attending, as well as Russia and China and the Central Asian republics, they talked about economics and energy supplies, as well as the obvious diplomatic coup that I think the Chinese have pulled off, which is getting the Taliban to agree to let them into Afghanistan. And the coda to that is Wang's meeting with Assad in Syria. What do you think that organization is going to do in future? Is it going to become like a G7 of the East or a Davos of the East and possibly threaten the hegemony of the dollar in the West, and particularly the petrodollar? I'll leave it at that. I've got other things, but I'll leave it at that. What do you think?
Alan, I'm going to say you're absolutely right to home in on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, because this is an interesting organization, because it began very much as a very informal grouping of countries that were basically wanting to find out whether they could really be friends. And it was initially very much a Russia-China thing, and with the Central Asians thrown in as well. But gradually it's evolving and it's becoming institutionalized, and it's beginning to become one of these key institutions that are all of them coming together in strange ways. And morphing into something an awful lot more concrete. So you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which binds China and Russia. Then you have the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And on the other side, you have the Russian Greater Eurasia Project and the Eurasian Economic Community, which Russia has created, and also the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is actually a formal military alliance that brings together Russia and certain former Soviet states. So all of these things are beginning to sort of cohere. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has the role of binding them all together. Every country that is part of these things, one of these institutions, is also a part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And at the same time, the more successful and effective it appears to be, the more countries appear willing to join. So India and Pakistan are there as observers. So is Iran. Iran is now a candidate member and does formally want to join. And so, by the way, there's the existing government in Afghanistan. And both the Russians and the Chinese want to make sure that the Taliban, if it does take over, which seems almost certain now, will want to continue with that. So we're going to see how it works out. At one level, I don't think it's the core institution. I think there are lots of different institutions all banging against each other, all increasingly cohering and cooperating. But it's the umbrella one, and it's the one which is now reaching out and is pulling in other primarily Asian states. And I think that what you said, the G7 of the East, is a very high possibility. I can very easily see it becoming that. I certainly don't see it any kind of Davos, not at all. It's completely unlike Davos. Davos is an informal entity, which, you know, the great and the good, or perhaps the great and the not so good, meet in Davos and they speak together. This is an interstate grouping that is forming, and it's much more like the G7. And to be straightforward about it, it's going to dwarf the G7, because note also the intelligence of the people who run it, because though China has difficult relations with India, it reaches out to India and is offering India ultimate opportunity to join this grouping, whereas India is excluded from the G7.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I think it's very important to India because there is a chance of a gas pipe being put down into India from Central Asia, and they need, just as China, they need energy and oil as much as everybody else, as much as China does, at least anyway. Is it a big push by China to get into the Middle East? It's looking for energy supplies. It's going into Iran. It's going into Afghanistan. It's got friends in Assad. It looks like a big push to have a great deal more influence in the Middle East. And with Djibouti as a naval base and the China-Pakistan economic corridor going down to the Arabian Sea, it looks like a geopolitical plan by the Chinese to get greater influence in the energy-producing areas in the Middle East. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, and they have very good relations also with Saudi Arabia. I should say that I think there is a distinction between Central Asia, and I would personally put countries like Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey as more forming part of the Central Asian world, and the Middle East, which I personally consider an Arabic region. That's my own division. But certainly the Chinese are increasingly interested in both. They've got good relations with Saudi Arabia, and as I discussed in my channel, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has now gone to Damascus and met there with Bashar al-Assad, a very underreported event and a very important one.
Right, it hardly reported at all in the British media, not at all. It tells you something, doesn't it? Well, it tells me something anyway. But with I think the big change was when Russia decided to have closer relationship with China. Russia obviously is the backup for the Chinese diplomatically, and I think that has given the Chinese a great deal of confidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just agree. I mean, that's all I wanted to say. I completely agree. It's the key block in the structure. I mean, without Russia, it isn't viable. With Russia, well, we see what happens.
Just a coda, and then I'll finish. Several months ago, we discussed all this, what was happening, and we suggested that the Chinese and Russians would wipe the floor diplomatically with the new US administration. This is happening.
Yes, I can't say it more simply than that. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that is exactly right, and we're going to see more and more of it now. It's going to be an interesting pattern.
Absolutely, and especially the relationship between the US, which we discussed again, with the US and its major allies. I don't know whether they're tearing their hair out or not, but things must be difficult in US relationships with their allies. Okay, guys, I'll leave it at that. Lots more to talk about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. Great to hear from you. Thank you. Yeah, Alexander, the Biden White House is busy speaking with Facebook, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
to deal with what's going on in the world.
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's the overriding priority at the moment.
Yeah. All right, let's bring in Simon. We've got quite a few people waiting on board. We'll bring in Simon. Then we got Kelvin, Igor, Rifi, Coach Red Pill, James, and Das. All right. So Simon, you are up. Simon, you're with us.
Yes, can you hear me, gentlemen?
Very, very much so, yes.
Yep, all clear.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Alexander for his very lengthy naval build-ups video, which I thought was excellent. I think we are seeing a period of time which I think is very, very similar to sort of pre-1914. And we're probably about 1903, 1904, but we're probably moving at a vastly accelerated rate. I think that I'm quite shocked by when I see American geopolitical analysts. So few of them have a positive view of the US position. When the fundamentals are still true at the moment, that if the US wants to, it can still effectively blockade China. It probably can't win a conflict in the South China Seas, but it can effectively blockade China. And China is so dependent on imports that would have a catastrophic effect on Chinese industry and on the Chinese social activity. But my question, my sort of burning question at the moment is a couple of things that I've noticed in the US. Is there seems to be something of a buyer strike going on with US consumers that are resisting purchasing goods at these highly inflated rates. And I think that may have consequences later this year that people aren't expecting, with the much touted V-shaped recovery. The other question I would ask is, after fighting the longest war that the US or Great Britain's ever fought, why is the mainstream media devoting so little coverage to the Afghan withdrawal?
It's a very good question. Both very good points, actually, Simon. Simon, I think you had some connection with the Financial Times, or used to read it, or used to work for it. I can't remember, but
yeah, I used to work there. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I read an article in the Financial Times just the other day about how the expectations of a US recovery are starting to fade. They're not quite as, and we haven't given up on it yet. But the article said the cracks are showing. In other words, that things aren't happening in quite the way that people expected. People aren't rushing out to buy. There's obviously an awful lot more nervousness. So maybe we won't see a V-shaped recovery. And of course, What that means going forward is a very good question, because of course we've had an administration which has staked an awful lot on getting an economic boom going in the United States. And if that doesn't happen in the United States, it's going to be very difficult. And of course, if there is no boom in the United States, can there be a boom in the world economy also, particularly as it seems that China's economy, probably for different reasons, may also be slowing. So if there's not going to be a boom in the world economy, it seems to me we've piled up huge amounts of debt, printed vast amounts of money with very little to show. Now, I am not somebody who's able to foresee the future in this respect. So I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen next year. I'm not going to try and predict, but certainly I think you're right. And I think this business about the buyer strike is interesting. And we're going to see, maybe people will be encouraged to come pouring out and start shopping like, crazy, especially if they sense the prices are going to be higher tomorrow than they are today. But maybe they'll hold back instead. They won't buy things that they see as overpriced. Maybe they're not that secure about how they feel about their finances. Maybe things are not going to shape out as they were, in which case all the calculations that everybody has been making in Washington are going to prove embarrassingly wrong. Now, on Afghanistan, you are absolutely right. This is a debacle. It is also an object lesson in how not to conduct foreign policy. The whole intervention in Afghanistan has been massively mismanaged from a very early point. And you would have thought that it would be the big foreign policy, international relations news story. You'd have thought people would be talking about this. They'd be talking about the fact that the talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government in Doha ended on Sunday without any sign of progress, that fighting is continuing, and the Taliban are continuing to advance, that the US is now starting to evacuate people from Kabul. I've just done a program about this for my own channel, but you just squirreled away. I found it in a small article in Washington Examiner. You'd have thought that all of this would be big news. And it is a sign, I think, firstly, of how controlled the media has become, that what is by any measure a huge news story is being relegated to points of unimportance. But it's also it's an indication of how unwilling people are to learn the lessons of that war, and how it's simply an embarrassment that has to be erased or cancelled, to use the in word of the moment. Just as people are sometimes being cancelled nowadays, you cancel the war, you don't talk about it, and that is terribly wrong. It's a terrible mistake, and it just guarantees that we're going to make the same mistake, or some people will want us to make the same mistake somewhere else.
I think that's all true, but I think it goes further than that. The West hasn't won a major war since 1945.
Yeah.
America lost in Vietnam.
Yeah.
North Korea was effectively a tie.
Yeah.
Both Gulf Wars have ended in disaster, and the Afghanistan adventure has ended in disaster.
Yes.
I mean, I actually heard someone who was, I think he was a chief of staff, saying it wasn't a military defeat. Well, it was a military defeat. You're leaving. You haven't achieved your objectives. And yet, and I would say one of the primary reasons our intervention failed is that because of the actions of the Pakistan military and security apparatus, which is also, but Pakistan's the largest recipient of UK overseas aid. It has been for decades, and there is no. Let's look at this again. In fact, there was a report yesterday saying that the Afghan ambassador in Pakistan's daughter had been kidnapped and harmed. She's okay now, but she's been recovered, and that the Pakistani Air Force had threatened to bomb Afghan troops if they tried to secure the border crossing between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which has been seized by the Taliban. That's the act of a hostile state.
Yes. Yes, I mean it's quite.
And where's the anger? Where's the rage? Where's the, no remittances to Pakistan, no visas to Pakistani citizens, no flights to Pakistan, no overseas aid, no access to the SWIFT system. This country has actively been involved in the killing of US and NATO soldiers.
Yes. Well, absolutely true. I mean, last year we had this extraordinary phony story about the Russians paying bounties to the Taliban to kill Americans, which was completely not true and entirely pointless from a Russian point of view. And of course, Pakistan has in fact been quietly helping the Taliban for a long time, ever since it was first established back in the 90s. And of course, it doesn't get criticized. You are absolutely right, but it is also a symptom of how complicated our foreign policies have become. And we still want to use Pakistan. Well, there's, I suspect, the inertia from when Pakistan was a Cold War ally, and all sorts of people were, having stakes in Pakistan dating from that time. We also have in Britain, let's be straightforward about this, a political dimension for this, in that the Pakistani community in Britain is a major part of the Labour Party's electoral coalition. So they will always lobby for aid to continue to be sent to Pakistan. I'm sorry to say that as straightforwardly as that, but I'm sure it's true. And we have other things.
No, I think that's true. And I think you can already see that the fact that this country has, I think that's another shocking thing that people may not be aware of, that that foreign readers may not be aware. As part of the Brexit deal, that we offered residency rights and eventual citizenship rights to EU citizens. That was expected to be 3 million. It's now over 6 million. Yeah. Our political class is behaving irresponsibly and childishly in a world which is getting increasingly more dangerous. The actions of HMS Defender in the Black Sea were a very good example of that. And we really need to start wake up and realize that the golden age is over, and we're back to realpolitik again. And we ultimately, how did you turn two of the most militaristic countries in the world into virtual pacifists, Germany and Imperial Japan? Well, basically, you leveled their towns, you killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, and you taught them that the price of total war is total devastation, and you completely discredited the idea that use of military power as a means of exercising political change is a bad thing. And we have forgotten that's what we did. You only have to see pictures of what Germany looked like in 1945 to see what is required to change the will of a people, not just political leaders, but of a people. Now, in Afghanistan, if I was an Afghan tribesman and I knew that if I don't do what the Taliban tell me to do, they'll come and kill my family in front of me and then kill me. But if I don't do what the NATO people do, they won't do anything. Well, that's a really very, very, very simple choice.
Well, absolutely.
And that's what we need to do. And I've even spoken I spoke with two lieutenants. One was an infantry platoon commander, and one was an intelligence officer who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. And I was shocked by the hearts and minds nonsense that they had obviously been taught and they'd obviously been practicing in Afghanistan.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you, Simon, about this. It was a very strangely conducted war. And I remember watching a BBC, it was a British television documentary in which they showed British troops in Afghanistan going from one village to another, talking to people in this hearts and minds way. And I was just generally wondering, what are these people doing there? Why are they there? It's a terrible thing to put soldiers in that kind of position where they are, required to perform those kind of absurd orders and that kind of nonsensical mission. It's a complete misuse of how soldiers ought to be used. But Simon, can I just say, just to move on a bit, I think your point about this, we're in 1903 in terms of the geopolitical conflict. I think that is about right. The big difference in 1903 is that Britain, which was the country that felt itself threatened, began to realize that it had to make radical changes to the way it conducted its policy. It completely reorganized its armed forces, including its navy. It started to forge alliances, real alliances. It began to engage in active diplomacy in those times. But we are not doing that. And at the same time, it also has to be said that one of the reasons we did eventually get a war in 1914 was because that diplomacy in the end failed. And it wasn't just the British who failed. In fact, the British failed less than others. Some of the other major players failed too. This is a time when the diplomatic arts have to be rediscovered. Otherwise, we could very well drift into the same kind of catastrophe that we saw in 1914.
Well, Alexander, this is turning into a love fest here, I think, because I could not agree more. And one of the things I think that has shocked me most, I think in my entire life, is the congressional testimony by the head of the Joint Chiefs and the head of the Navy. And can you imagine Admiral Fisher sitting down and going to a parliamentary committee? Yeah, we really need to see critical race theory. And that dreadnought idea I had, well, we probably won't go ahead with that. We need to invest the money here. I think America, though it may have a large part of the military advantages, that in some ways puts it in a much stronger position than Britain was then.
Yeah,
I think it completely lacks the leadership at the senior levels. Not just in the military, but also in the diplomatic corps as well.
Absolutely.
And that is very worrying for us all. But just one last thing, going back to the economy thing, I don't know if you guys have taken a look at the reverse repo that's been occurring. Basically, the repo market is an interbank lending market normally, but you can also basically, as a commercial bank, park your money with the Federal Reserve, but you can also do a reverse repo, and normally that's around $100 billion a day, something like that. Well, that has been spiking over the last since April, and is reaching almost $1 trillion. And it's literally what it's effectively saying is, as a commercial bank is saying, rather than lend money to consumers or businesses, or lend money on a short-term basis to other banks, the only way I feel secure is if I basically pass that money back to the Federal Reserve. And I think that is not a good sign. But I'll leave you here and keep up the good work, guys. You do excellent work. Alex, I loved your video on Ayia Napa, though I found it really, really shocking, because I remember I was there about 15 years ago, and those streets would have been absolutely heaving with people. I mean, I think COVID is going to go on a lot longer than anyone thought or feared. But thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you, Sam. And I'm not sure what the tourist situation is now with the UK, if they've opened up or not. I don't know, but that plays a big role, especially for Cyprus.
Yeah, people are. I literally overheard a group of teenagers going out there clubbing, and and I thought you might not have the experience that you expect to have, because there literally won't be anyone else there. So, and I think the other thing that's worrying is that it seems that some of the more advanced, so-called advanced vaccines are less effective against the Delta variant. And that means that we may need to revaccinate people with a different vaccine. So this could go on and on and on. But on that happy note,
it will. All right.
Okay.
At least until November 2024. Then it'll all be over. Take care, guys.
3 years. Take care.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. The writing's on the wall for all this stuff, Alexander. We're going to bring in Kelvin, Igor, Rifi, Coach Red Pill is in the house, James, Sergey, and Zarael. Kelvin, I'm going to put you into the call. Hello, Kelvin.
How do I put myself in the? I'm on it.
Yeah, you're with us.
I think you guys are brilliant. I've been listening to you for a while. So the last year, I've become very close to Maria Farmer, one of the Epstein survivors, who is pretty much gagged and capped by media. compared to the others in the level that they will go to in covering the case. And some of the people close to her, for example, Whitney Webb, who I think is the most intelligent voice in independent journalism right now. She's like an X-Man. She's seeing everything and putting everything together. It's like the scope of this girl's clarity. Honestly, I feel that only comes, and also in Maria's case, the clarity only comes from absolute purity of intention. And that brings a real clarity of vision of mind, which I think is often is an aspect overlooked in media. You were saying, a guy before was saying about why don't media this and this and this. I do see media as being part of the operating mechanism of the big financial agendas overall. So what I've seen with Maria is that it comes to a certain point, and for example, she was invited to go on The View and talk about some things, and when they asked her, like, what do you want to talk about, they said, go home, we're not having you on. You're not allowed to mention Wex now. You're not allowed to mention the Israeli intelligence who used to come and visit Epstein while you were there, Ehud Barak there every few days, and things like this. So one thing that I would say is, well, Maria's been struggling with cancer for the whole year. If any viewers or any promoters, is possible to know, like her website, mariapharmaart.com, she's still able to take donations for treatment, which she very seriously needs because somebody attacked her fundraiser.
Can you say that address again? Can you say that address again?
mariapharmaart.com.
Okay, great.
So there's an email section, and people can help her if they'd like to. One thing that I do see, I don't see contemporary Western politics working. I would say that every year we have an increased amount of money spent on war, even though nobody really knows where a lot of it goes. It's not all accounted for. We have an increased amount of money going up, rather than pretty much anything coming down, and more going into less and less hands. I don't see that changing with voting or administrations. Just a quick point about Afghanistan, because I live in the Middle East. I would say that there was a traditional mechanism called Lawyer Georgia in Afghanistan, where a member of each section of representative of the community in the olden days used to come together, sit together until they've agreed everything and sorted everything out. And I do feel that this is what the Middle East as a whole needs right now, without external or arms interest or any kind of external interest, any kind of financial interest, because we really do need peace to avoid a coming war with Iran. It would be possible to sit down together as a circle in almost native tradition and just listen to each other if people are sincere, if they actually want peace, until there is something sorted out where everybody's happy. And I think the most forbidden thing that I've found living here is actually to envisage that everybody can be happy, because it's almost been defined since it was cut up by external forces as a region which doesn't have any solutions. And we all know that divide and rule is kind of the order of the day here, as long as you have those strings. But nobody will. People can't really see outside of it another solution. I feel like something like a Middle Eastern Union would be very good for the region to have some kind of. Anyway, the point I wanted to ask you about is that well, there was just one more thing, if you don't mind. Good. It takes about like 50 seconds. Just you were saying about the East-West thing. I don't believe that is also accidental, that this continues to be like this polarity of like world superpowers competing for global supremacy. I think it's very much a Western thing. I don't think that that's something that China and Russia have always, or India, or whatever the large states have always like wanted. And it's almost been something to define because they know that there's a certain degree of control obtainable from that. People like Kissinger, for example, have been maintaining that status quo for a long time. So a global council of equals at the UN with no vetoes would be an amazing progress for the planet and a path towards peace. And those vetoes came in at the time of the Second World War. Even though America was backing both sides, as we know from both sides from the last war, which is how it became such a big financial power, because most of the Nazis went into the American economy. And Deutsche Bank being a big part of that, and being a big part of the European Union as well. So what I wanted to ask you was, how much do you feel that the visibility of extra accountable influences, such as Epstein conglomerate, let's say syndicate, people with 5 passports, people that can buy judges, that can buy politicians, can put people in the White House, has on the state of affairs right now. And that being such a small number of people, there's a gentleman called Ronald Bernard, who actually was an insider from that, done an incredible interview, one of the whistleblowers of our time. So how much is that possible to be dealt with as on a level where things actually function and come into discussion? And how much are people being aware, for example, of the amount of that influence on, for example, the current White House? You have Blinken as the Secretary of State. Blinken's stepfather was Samuel Pisa, who was Robert Maxwell's lawyer. Robert Maxwell's daughter is in jail for rape, trafficking, for making blackmail tapes on high-level people. You have Eric Lander in the White House as the tech guy. He was Epstein's good friend. You had Leah Blinken in the White House at Bill Clinton's time, at the time that he was blackmailed with Monica tapes not to allow a right of return for Palestinians. There was Gerasi at Hillary Clinton's White House time, who was on the Libya war board. And he was also part of this kind of, let's say, the Zionist side of this syndicate. So how much do you think now that becomes more and more of like a transparent veil, that people see that Biden is not making any decisions for the country or the most powerful nation in the world? I mean, he's like talking about ice cream and can't remember his lines. You have something next to him, he's obviously a spy. Really, I mean, like, you look at his family connections and everything, he's a spy, and yet he's representing America. He's writing billion-dollar arms budgets to refresh Iron Domes and things like this. And then you have Bill Gates, who's a major financier of Epstein, which is something that Whitney Webb has brought up, having such a big influence. You have many, many big names who were like, really, there's almost nothing you can say to touch these people, because the scope of influence, if you drew it in the size of people's influence, it's so ginormous. It's a tiny number of people. I mean, we are 7 billion people. Can this be addressed? Are people likely to wake up to this? And can the understanding of the reach of this case, I'm not talking about Ghislaine's child, that will be as redacted as they like, but can it make a difference?
Well, can I just say, first of all, that there's always been wire pullers and people who work behind the scenes at every point and era in history. But I think you're quite right. I don't think in my lifetime it has been as pervasive and as powerful as it is today. And not only are there wire pullers, but it's also becoming increasingly clear that to a very great extent in the United States especially, I mean, European countries are slightly different categories because they've always been more family dynastic power there. But in the United States especially, what you are beginning to see is a political class. Not beginning to see. What you have seen is a political class emerge, which is now completely embedded within the power structures and which is becoming unaccountable, and which is also connected through family connections, through social connections, power connections, which never existed before. And that is something, by the way, which the people who created the United States, the people who drew up the Constitution, were always very worried about. They particularly didn't want that to happen. They thought that this was a very bad thing. They wanted politics to be transparent and out in the open, with the people who had power and influence being the people who were elected to clearly defined political and administrative posts. And yet you're seeing that change. And it seems to me that the heart of the problem is the United States, because to a great extent before, the United States was the exception. If you've gone back in time, as I said, in Europe, you always had political dynasties and political classes. But then the Americans came along, especially after the Second World War, and they had a different kind of political tradition, a more open one, much more open one. And that seemed to be, for a time, the system that they were going to try and that was being emulated by other people. So when the United States turns in on itself and starts to become more dynastic, more oligarchic than it was,
Bush Clinton. I mean, it's not
that is very bad. I would say that there was a book written in 1911 in the United States by a man called Robert Nichols, who actually said that there is an iron law of oligarchy, and in the end, every political system ends up there. Anyway, that's Nichols. Now, where will this all end? Now, the ancient Greeks, of whom Alex and I are obviously connected to some extent, because, you know, we are Greeks and we can read to some extent some of what they write in our own language. Anyway, the ancient Greeks were very familiar with oligarchy. And Aristotle, who was our greatest political theorist, said that oligarchy always ends in one of two ways, either through the establishment of a democracy or through the establishment of what he called a tyranny, but which we would call a dictatorship. And it was, dictatorship doesn't have to be just one individual. It can be a group of people who run things in an authoritarian way. But he considered oligarchy to be unstable, with a tendency to work towards one of those directions. So it seems to me we have a choice. We can either go one way or we can go the other. We can go the way of tyranny, dictatorship, or we can go back towards the way of democracy. Now,
maybe we have a tyranny which is selling itself as a democracy. So in terms of democracy as a word, you have an issue there. You have a stumbling block.
Well, indeed you do. But there we go. But the choice, in a sense, is ours. But in order to exercise that kind of choice, we need to be aware of what is going on around us. And that's where all the attempts to control information come from, in my opinion. And that's what we're trying to, you know, in our small way, to struggle against. And we're not the only people who do. So I don't think the struggle is anywhere close to being resolved. But certainly we are at that point now.
We need the communication platforms, the circular communication platforms.
Indeed, yeah. Indeed.
Sorry, I forgot. Something came up. Do you not see that? Do you see a difference? It's a little bit sidetracked, but it's pretty much not as well. If you look at the people involved in what I was discussing, like, do you see a difference in American foreign policy, Israeli foreign policy, and UK foreign policy at all?
Oh yes, I mean, I think each of these countries do have differences in foreign policy. I mean, I think the British, for example, at the moment have a particular foreign policy which on certain key issues is becoming increasingly distinct from that of the United States. I mean, it is fairly well known that the present British government and the Democratic Party government in the United States don't see eye to eye at all. The same is true for Israel. So yes, they do work together. The United States is obviously the dominant influence.
But the tech companies, I mean, Microsoft is now, you know, Gates, Microsoft, and the biggest center in Israel. And then we know the last few days about the hacking, but that is not new. I mean, you know, Robert Maxwell was selling Promise software, which also, you know, was part of the nuclear weapons coming over illegally to Israel. So, I mean, there does seem to be, like, you can't be a big tech company if you don't turn up at a big tech conference there and sign your allegiance.
I mean, as I said, I mean, we are in a we're in a very difficult situation. I mean, we're in a difficult situation, and we got to see how things work. I still like to believe, as I said, that ultimately these trends will reverse themselves, will fail, because so much of what is being proposed in order, if you like, to consolidate these oligarchic positions, in my opinion, is utopian and unsustainable, and doesn't take into account a realistic view of human nature. So that's what I believe. And that's why I believe it will fail, and that we will return to more democratic structures eventually. But I'm obviously not a prophet. I don't pretend, I'm not complacent about any of this. On the contrary, I'm very worried about all of this, and I may be wrong, but we will see. That, for me, is the great issue of the day. Anyway,
I love a saying from the 70s. It said communication can only occur between equals, and I do think that the more communication between individuals that goes on, it's gonna. There are hundreds of monkey things. I mean, even though it's just a theory, I've seen it on Twitter. I've seen that suddenly somebody will get something, and everybody will get it at the same time. There was a day that 1 or 2 people started talking about Operation Paperclip, and then suddenly it was trending within like a couple of days.
Yes,
and I do think there are waves of thought which go around that people suddenly start to realize things that have been in their face all the time.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree.
Would you like to see any of Maria's pictures? The new ones that she painted, the last series she's painted, have not been shown.
Well, I think the best thing to do there is to forward them, send them to Alex, email them to Alex.
I'm very interested to see those pictures.
All right, if you'd ever like to cover them in any of your future shows, could you let me know?
Absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll drop my email in the private chat. Kelvin, you'll see it, and just send them to me, okay?
And we're all praying,
and we'll do the rest
for Maria's healing through the cancer journey. Universally.
Absolutely. We wish her all the best and health above all else. Thank you, Kelvin.
Thank you very much for your time.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, Alexander, we are going to bring in first we have a question from Igor. He was going to come on to the call, but he just sent us the questions in the private chat. So I'll read those questions. We'll bring in Rifi right after that, and then Coach Red Pill. So let me just read you those questions from Igor, who was going to come on, but he just said, can you guys answer these 3 questions? Let me also drop my information for Kelvin so he can send me Maria's pictures. Yes. Okay. And here's what Igor said. Mr. Alexander, no need to have me on. I just wanted to ask 3 pragmatic questions. Number 1, what 3 languages a young man should learn besides English?
Right.
Okay. Let's go one by one. Question number 1, what 3 languages should a young man learn besides English? Alexander.
What 3 languages? Well, of course, it depends what you want to be in the world, but English, definitely. I mean, that's the absolute.
Besides English. Besides
on top of English.
Yes.
Right. I would say Chinese, obviously, Spanish, and Russian.
That is exactly the same 3 languages I was going to say. The exact same 3: Spanish, Russian, Chinese. Chinese is spoken, obviously, by billions of people. Spanish, if you know Spanish, you have a good basis to learn other languages like Portuguese, Italian, etc. And of course, Spanish is a very important language spoken by a lot of people. And Russian, because the same philosophy with Spanish. If you know Russian, you can also learn or understand a lot of other languages from the Cyrillic Russian. Anyway, question number 2, good country to start a family or business in technology?
Good technology. Now, that is a very interesting question. Well, I don't know that they're necessarily the same thing. Some countries seem to be better than other countries. A lot of technology startups in China, but I don't think it's a particularly good place to start a family, given the sort of erratic Chinese family policies. I've heard that some of the Baltic states, Estonia, have been quite good in that respect. I've heard some good things about Russia, by the way, nowadays. So, but again, it's not always consistent. Maybe if you wanted me to, I'm not always a fan of the Baltic states. Perhaps if you want to do both at the same time, Estonia might not be a bad place. Though I do understand they have lots of, the birth rate there is not very high. But I don't know whether Alex has any ideas there.
Look at Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
Look at Eastern Europe, Romania,
No,
Hungary,
yeah.
Poland.
Yeah.
Look at the Balkans.
Yeah.
Serbia, Croatia.
Yeah.
And look at Mexico.
Yeah.
Look at Mexico. Yeah, absolutely. And the final question, and we'll get to Rifi and then Coach Red Pill. The final question is the superpower of the 21st century. What is it?
Well, everybody says China will be, and perhaps it will. We shouldn't overestimate China's potential or underestimate its problems. But if it's not going to be the United States, and I do think that the days when the United States can be a superpower in the same way that it was are probably running out, because I mean, it's a diminishing proportion of the human population and of the world economy. Maybe it will still be China, but China has many problems. It's not by any means a country which has resolved those problems, and I don't think it is stable and secure in the way that, say, the United States was mid-century. And I'm somebody who believes very strongly that it was that stability and that belief in American institutions that Americans had in the mid-century and before, which were ultimately the true source of American power. So all the other things came because of that, and people wanted to go to the United States and settle there because of that. And I don't somehow feel that China has something similar to that, which the United States did then. But I suppose logically, I mean, the most likely country at the moment is China. But, things can turn out all sorts of strange ways. There's an interesting article, by the way, in the Financial Times, Simons' former newspaper, which actually said that, China might not become a superpower, not just because of these problems, but because it's not completely certain that the Chinese population itself, I'm not talking about the government now, the population itself wants to embrace the kind of challenges that being a superpower also involves. I mean, there are challenges to it as well.
Yeah. All right. Great questions, Igor. Thank you very much. Let's bring in Rifi. Then we got Coach Red Pill, Sergey. Rifi, you are on live with us.
Thanks for taking my call.
Oh, Tarif.
It's Tarif.
Yeah.
You changed the name. All right.
Well, I usually put in whistleblower Tariq son.
Yes. Yes.
I forgot. I forgot that's what I was supposed to do. Okay, I'm gonna go.
Yes, we're listening.
I'm gonna go in my spiel. First, I like to say, free Julian Assange, free Dagnazer, free West Papua New Guinea, and the U.S. need to leave Haiti alone. Let them vote for the people that they want to vote for. Okay. Sarah Morris tweeted out something today. It was from The Guardian, I think it was. That, what's that woman name from Britain? Protel, I think is her name. Is trying to pass a new security law called the Secrecy Act that's similar to the Espionage Act, where it's going to go after whistleblowers, activists, and journalists. Okay, that's terrible. Whitney Webb wrote an article yesterday talking about this software program that the Israelis made and sold it to the United States government called Cyber Reason, right? I think, I'm trying to remember what the article said, but it was something like connected to like Pegasus in a way. Pegasus has been discussed like 2 years ago when Lee Stranahan brought it up on his show. Whitney Webb was talking about Pegasus and Palantir and things of that nature. Predictive programming, trying to predict future crimes, hacking into people's phones, dealing with the Maxwells, the Ghislaine Maxwells and the sisters that's dealing with these type of software. So Whitney Webb was trying to bring light to that. Of course, Amnesty National got to put Julian Assange as a prisoner of conscience. They have yet to do it. They asked for his release, but they should at least put us as prisoners of conscience, because since the guy came out 2-3 weeks ago saying that he lied, that should at least give him motivation to go forward and put that man as POC, Joe Biden, as y'all know, last week came out how him and the press secretary said something about, this Facebook and these social media platforms is killing people because of the vaccine thing. Instantly, when they said that, and they was talking about banning people on all platforms, I instantly, which I know y'all know, and the people that's listening to your program that's hip to this, that was a cover story, right? I say something's going on, something's gonna go down. why they saying it's now just out in the open now, putting themselves in the crosshairs of Trump. Well, now they can, sue him now and probably win because they're working with these tech giants, right? All of a sudden, Sunday, story popped up with progressives. What you call it? I just said the word. The story came out about these journalists being hacked, activists throughout the world, such and such. 50,000 names, 1,000 names was released already, I think, of these phones being hacked, people being spied on. So I'm looking at the timing of what Joe Biden and his press secretary said. It's like they're becoming worried because now you had this thing come up with Pegasus. Then you got growing support for Julian Assange, and hopefully they release this man. And you got the guy from the DOJ came out with and say something about they're not gonna go after journalists' records, which is a good thing. So you got all this building up, this momentum building up now. You got these journalists around the world now upset because their name on the list. And I guarantee you that they're going to start searching around. They're going to want revenge. And they're going to start pushing for the release of Julian Assange. I'm surprised the Washington Post ran a story that, the Forbidden Stories had broke the story, and Hertz News and Washington Post helped them out dealing with practices. And also, the Washington Post posted in an opinion piece a letter for that came from one of Julian Assange's lawyers. So something's starting to shift. I'm seeing something like a frantic behavior is taking place from these so-called people in power. My situation being a whistleblower for the past 6 years of strange things happening to me, right? I notice every time something happens, like my situation with me, it computer get hacked or things like that. It happens more to me of weird things, and I think something be going behind the scenes. They're afraid of the Pegasus thing. They're afraid of Julian Assange being released, and the steam picking up. It's almost like they're trying to contain the information. You see what I'm saying? It's like they're trying to put a lid on it, and they're hiding it behind the vaccine. Excuse me, I'm sorry. They're hiding behind the medicine thing, dealing with the epidemic, right? As if they're gonna use that not only to go after the high wire and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the lawyer that sued pharmaceutical companies for hurting children and adults with these medications, right? But I think they're going to use that to go after us, truth tellers, activists, journalists, right? They're going to branch it off. So these platforms, now they're talking about banning people across these platforms now. It's becoming dangerous. Julian Assange's team is picking them steam. People need to donate to WikiLeaks. Go to Stella Moore's page and donate to Crowd Justice. We call in this show, we speak, but sometimes we got to put money behind our words. We got to do things and write our senators, write our congressmen, write our. If you live in the other countries that have parliamentary, write your parliamentary people about freedom of speech and push to stop these ongoing threats. Okay, the situation when the guy about 3-4 callers ago, he brought up something dealing with China. And I saw your program dealing with the aircraft carrier. That was pretty good. How that they might blockade China. That's going to be nearly impossible, even before you get to the military version of trying to military block them. Because first of all, I saw something last week. I was online. I was trying to say. I was trying to find out something about Malaysia, right? Southeast Asia, dealing with dating and what's cultures is accepted. Because Southeast Asia got their own little, schisms about certain people.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came down in employment for Malaysia, the number one people that hired for Malaysian jobs, even over the indigenous population, are Chinese. Engineering, sciences, buying land, manufacturing, you name it. They all like gold in Malaysia. Chinese will leave China and go and live in Malaysia, buy land, and get jobs, working in the banking sector, engineering sector, dealing with all type of stuff. Indonesia, Chinese is ranked as number 3 on the list in Indonesia. The indigenous population, they get the first. They got a quota that they got in Indonesia. They got to have. And what you call that? The indigenous population, which is people that look like me, the Asians with dark skin, right? The original inhabitants of Indonesia, they get first preference for a job. Then the other ethnic group that's similar to the ethnic group in Malaysia and throughout like Southeast Asia, they get number 2. Then the Chinese get number 3, and the other is your Indians, and everybody else is last. So the tourism in Malaysia depends a lot on Chinese traffic. Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Nepal, that region. You get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I watch these episodes on television. on YouTube of people traveling in Southeast Asia. A lot of foreigners, like from Europe, Africa, of course, in America. But I see a lot of Chinese foreigners. They're spending money left and right. So it's more than just a military blockade. They're not. If they go try to get Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, that's not going to happen. They're not going to close down their ports to China just because the U.S. and Britain want them to. Because the Chinese spend a lot of money in those countries. It's not going to happen. So what you want to say something, Alex?
No, carry on.
Okay. So it's not going to happen. It's amazing when you look for something and you're not intending to look for it. You was looking for something else, but something else pop up and you're like, wow, I didn't know that. And so it's like, it's not going to happen. And I was thinking about what was going on in South Africa, and I'm glad I watched y'all's show last week. I saw Dr. James Holm. He's a Pan-Africanist. He was breaking down what was going on and how the guy, Zuma, I think his name, he was a union leader, and basically was saying it's the truth that the guy was corrupt. He took something and he took a good thing. He just gave out to his family and friends, and the money was supposed to go to the people for certain projects and stuff. And he just destroyed it. But he had his own fraction. Now you got inside fights between the ANC fighting each other. You got the Zulus fighting against the other tribe, and it's sad, because this is weakening the BRICS, and that's not the way to go. You need investment. You need people to come there, go to South Africa, and invest heavily into the infrastructure. I heard the president. They had another president that was there. I think before him, I heard it was doing a good job, but somehow they got him out. I forgot his name, but yeah. So I'm trying to see if I did. I'm trying to. Oh yeah. I know y'all witnessing the past 3 days. Russia unveiled two new technologies to the military, right? The MiG-41 single engine aircraft that's going to take on the F-35. Aircraft that's super heavy, expensive, hard to maintain, and trying to sell it to Australia and throughout the world. Who you think gonna buy that? Who you think people gonna buy the F-35 or they gonna buy the MiG-41 that's coming out? I think they're gonna go with the MiG-41. And also, they just today unveiled a new missile system.
Yeah.
The Prometheus S-500 missile system. Missile system is large, it's huge, and it's super fast. I need to go to RT and watch that video. I'm like, God damn. Excuse my language. Wow. So, Russia is actually taking money and they put it into the sector to develop the military. There ain't no such thing as a middleman in Russia. Whereas in the US is a middleman. All right. I give you an example. I used to work for the VA in Houston, which to buy these ice machines. The ice machines was like $2,700. We couldn't get it directly from the manufacturer. We had to go through a middleman because of some type of law. The middleman was mark it up like 100 and something 50%. So the ice machine would go to $4,300. So $4,300 for an ice machine that actually costs $2,500. Whereas in Russia and China, ain't no such thing. So when they have a contract comes in for the J-20, ain't no middleman, ain't no corruption, and they save money. So yeah, that's all I got to say, gentlemen.
Excellent.
Tarif, thank you very much. Have a great day. Alexander, did you want to add something?
Yes, just a very few quick points on what Tarif said. Firstly, about Assange, it seems to me that we are now in a very important position in the case. There's going to be the appeal probably in November, heard by the High Court. There are concerns on the part of some people about that. I mean, it's all about the prison conditions in which he's going to be held. I was surprised that the US authorities were granted permission to appeal on that basis. And I do wonder sometimes whether perhaps, given that it seems that one of the things that the US is now saying is that they're happy for Assange to serve his prison sentence in Australia, whether there may have been a deal done between the US, the British, and conceivably at some point the Australians, to get Assange out of their collective hands by basically sending him off to Australia. So that'd be a very, very bad outcome. I wouldn't be at all sure, by the way, that this thing is necessarily going a good way. So I think in legal terms he should win. I'm far from certain that he will. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. On the thank you for watching my program on the aircraft carrier race and the naval race in the Pacific. The point I was making is that the United States still dominates the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it's still got a much more powerful navy in the Pacific. On the coast near China, the Chinese obviously are much stronger, but the further they move away from their coast, the stronger the Americans can become. And I think when Simon said that, the US has the potential possibility to impose that kind of blockade, I suspect it probably still can. That's the second thing I would say. Third thing is, of course, I've been to the Far East. I've seen how integrated with China the economies of the Far East absolutely are. Undoubtedly, a conflict between China and the United States would be devastating for those countries. Probably that is why it won't happen. But there is always the risk that something may go wrong. And about the new Russian fighter jet, about which I've been seeing pictures today, I would say I'm not absolutely sure that it is intended for the Russian Air Force. It may be intended primarily for export. We're not getting a great deal of information about it so far. It is not the MiG-41, which is a very high supersonic Mach 4 fighter jet, which is for interceptions. This is a much, much less expensive plane that will be used, I think, as an export model to sell around the world. And we'll see whether it does sell. But I think it's important to say at the moment, it looks like it's only a prototype. It hasn't yet had its first flight. That isn't expected until next year. And apparently the price for it will be $30 million, which will be, I think, a fifth of what the F-35 which will be its rival costs. But then price isn't the only thing that determines sales. So that's all I wanted to say, Tarif, briefly on the points you've made.
Tarif says, 199 super chat. Thanks. My channel is REFEE00. Once again, that's REFEE00. Thank you, Tarif. We are going to bring in Coach Red Pill. Coach Red Pill, bringing you into the stream.
Hey, gentlemen. How's it going? I hope you can hear me all right.
Yes. How are you doing, Coach Red Pill? Good to have you here.
It's a pleasure being here, and I just want to start out by saying that I love you guys' programs, both on the Duran and your individual channels. And I hope I don't sound like I'm just, bootlicking, but I have to say that you guys have the best geopolitical analysis on YouTube, and it's a real pleasure and an education to listen to your broadcasts. So I just want to put that out there. And I also want to say that I like your stuff so much that I would like to have you on my channel to have a broad-ranging conversation whenever it's convenient for you guys.
That'd be great.
Absolutely. I will put my email, Coach Red Pill, in the private chat. I actually put it in there once, but I'll put it in again. Let's set it up, and let's also do a call with you as well, because your channel is fantastic.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind of you to say. I just wanted to make two observations and a question. And my first observation is I live in Ukraine. I live in Kharkiv, which is in eastern Ukraine, about 40 kilometers from the Russian border. And I noticed during the whole April push, if you want to call it that's sort of like, as you very aptly discussed it, how there were like multiple things going on in Belarus and Ukraine insofar as sanctions and whatnot, as if the West were launching an offensive against Russia on multiple fronts. And Russia, Putin almost effortlessly seemed to defeat all of these offenses. It was a quite remarkable performance and a very astute analysis on your part. I just want to point out that here in Ukraine, the exchange rate of the hryvnia was rock steady throughout the whole period, as if the Ukrainians in general knew that nothing was going to change and that it was all just bluster. I've lived in enough countries that have had different kinds of geopolitical stresses that, you always pay attention to the exchange rate. And
that's absolutely true.
Yeah, it's always the gauge as to whether people believe that something's on the horizon. And I was watching the hryvnia versus the euro and versus the dollar like a hawk, and it never slipped. There was never any real movement in the hryvnia. And I do not believe that the Ukrainian central bank had the financial muscle to be stabilizing the hryvnia by selling dollars into the market to bring the price down. I don't think they have enough. Frankly, they don't have the cash on hand to do such a move. I think it was just people realized here in Ukraine, nothing's going to happen. That's observation number one. Take it for what it's worth.
That's a very, very important point.
Yeah. The second observation I want to make really quickly is you guys discussing how in the previous question, viewer had asked about China as a potential superpower. I do have to point out that in the mid 20th century, Americans never dreamed of leaving the United States, especially those Americans with money. They never dreamed of investing in Britain or Germany or Japan or anywhere other than the United States. I mean, of course, there were like sporadic cases, I would assume, of somebody who wanted to get some, English mansion, like in the plot of the novel The Remains of the Day. But nobody seriously thought of investing outside of the United States. Whereas in China, it seems to me, and you two can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems as everybody in China, all the Chinese rather, who have money, they want to park that money outside of China. That doesn't seem as if it's an endorsement of Chinese solidity long term. I don't know if you agree with me on that or not.
I think that's an overstatement. I mean, I've been to China, and certainly I got the impression that a lot of Chinese are very happy to stay in China and keep their money there. And of course, it's important to remember that you're talking about, 1.4 billion people. Not all of them, obviously, are in a position to invest money overseas. But you could still have what in volume terms might be lots of people investing money overseas and coming abroad. And at the same time, that's a small percentage of the actual population that's involved in entrepreneurial and business activities. But I think you are onto a correct point. I think that politically, the United States was much more solid. I'm going to use the word much more solid in mid-20th century than China is now. I mean, if you go to China, what I find in China is a sort of quiet euphoria, which is not the same as a kind of steady confidence.
Yes.
And that's a fundamental difference. A steady confidence is when you are absolutely sure that everything is going to be well. In China, they've come very far, very fast, and they're not sure that it's all going to be like that. They believe it will. I mean, there's at the same time a certain optimism, but I don't get that sense that this is a country at the moment, for example, which is prepared to take big risks. That's one thing. I mean, I'm talking now always about the population. I'm not talking about some people in, the Zhongnanhai, the leaders' compound in Beijing. They may be thinking quite differently. But if you're talking about the population they are relishing the moment at the moment. They are not, I think, looking for new. They don't particularly want China to become a global superpower in that sense, because they're not confident that the place is quite as solid as Americans mid-20th century were about the US. And I think that's a fundamental difference and a very important one.
By the way, I completely agree with your point that they are euphoric as opposed to solidly self-confident. The fact that the Chinese are making absolutely zero move to have the yuan or renminbi, as it's called, have it be the reserve currency to replace the dollar, strikes me as very interesting. And I wanted to float the following. This is apart from the actual question that I have, but the following issue in economics, if I may, on this particular issue, which is since the Americans seem hell-bent for leather on destroying the dollar, and it's looking as if the dollar might, no kidding, it might just blow up on them. Wouldn't the Chinese want to position another currency, and I'm thinking specifically of the euro, as a substitute reserve currency? And wouldn't that be to the benefit of the Europeans, because it would allow them a lot more flexibility, a lot more printing, so as to meet up the global demand of the euro as a reserve currency and allow them to get out of a lot of financial holes that they currently have? I mean, wouldn't it, and this is just spitballing here, but wouldn't it help the Europeans and the Chinese to position the euro as the replacement currency to the dollar?
There are people, I can tell you for an absolute fact, there are people who do think that. I don't know about China, but there are some people in Russia who are saying this. Well, at the end of the day, we don't trust the dollar. The Americans use it in this all this terrible way. So let's try and build up the euro quietly instead, because our own currencies aren't remotely ready to take up the slack. So let's build up the euro and use the euro instead. I think that would be not just a completely disastrous mistake, but I don't think it'd be good for the Europeans either. All it would do, first of all, with Europe, is that it would entrench even further a system which you have to live in Europe to experience how damaging to the fabric of European society and economy it really is. So I don't think it would be a good thing for Europe. And I think ultimately that the euro system is so brittle that I think trying to turn it into the global reserve currency in that way would put more stress on it than it could bear. The United States is an economic superpower. And back when the dollar was launched as the world's reserve currency, it was to an even greater extent. The dollar's strength and its position as a reserve currency reflected the strength, the underlying strength of the United States. I agree. The US is making many mistakes in how it runs its affairs at the moment, not least in its treatment of the dollar. But the European Union is not a state in the same way that the United States is, or was. If we talked about how much more brittle China is relative to the United States, well, with the European Union, we must go a massive step beyond that. It's even more brittle still. It's more like glass that could shatter than steel that can buckle and hold. And so I think that those ideas do exist. I don't think they're realistic ones. I think one of the great strengths of the dollar for the time being is that there is no obvious and simple alternative to it. And I think that's one of the things that sustains it as a reserve currency. The Chinese RMB is obviously not in a position to take its place. It's not even convertible at the moment. The euro has the problems I talked about. Many people talk about cryptocurrencies, but I don't think have yet evolved to the point where they've met universal acceptance, and there is an awful lot of resistance to going back to gold. So that's one of the factors that keeps the dollar where it is.
Well, I completely agree on the one hand on your observation about crypto. I mean, it's still with training wheels. It's not a real thing yet. It's interesting, but it's not a real asset. And insofar as gold, well, obviously the problem is the gold market is far too small. For any currency to be backed by gold. It's just not enough there. But I mean, I do have to insist this because I agree with your analysis as to the brittleness of Europe, the European economy, generally speaking. But I do sense, and you guys, well, we all live in Europe, but I'm interested in your perspective on this, that the European bureaucratic class would kind of really like it if the euro were the reserve currency. That on an ego level, they would go for it if they were given enough of an incentive, and in almost in a crazy way, as if they could like stick it to the Americans and to the dollar by having the euro replace the dollar. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, the political class would love the idea. When they launched the euro back in the 1990s, that was the point. It was going to replace the dollar. I remember all the brave talk that was going on at that time. It didn't work out that way. And I think that they would love to see it happen. And some of them perhaps, would still hope it will. But I don't think it's going to happen. It didn't happen before. I still don't really see it.
Well, okay, I'll leave that aside. My final observation on that particular issue is if the euro were to become the reserve currency, it would solve an awful lot of Europe's problems, because the demand for euro would solve the balance of payment issues that the European continent has continent-wide, and potentially that might be a financial incentive to do it. Though, again, I must agree with you that the European economy is far too brittle. But okay.
I think it would aggravate them. I think it would move Europe into a structural deficit, which would be an unsustainable one. But anyway, because you've got other things you want to say. But this is a discussion perhaps we could have on a program.
I'd be delighted, because I think that you and I agree that there are contradictory impulses. On the one hand, it's a bad idea. On the other hand, some people would love if this actually happened. I mean, apart from the European bureaucrats, the Russians and the Chinese would love to stick it to the dollar, because they know how badly it would hurt the American economy. So it's for a longer conversation. The question I wanted to ask, and then I'm sort of reconsidering it, because it is likely that you both won't know this that much because it's an obscure country, which is, of course, Chile, because I am from Chile. And as of late, there have been all kinds of just disastrous things going on. The leftist communists are roaring back to life. And they have won big, and they rescinded the former constitution, and they're going to create a new constitution, which is already baked in the cake, is going to be a lot more left-wing, not to say social justice, critical race theory leftist. And a lot of people are very concerned. But I was going to ask you about that, but that's a little bit too specific and might not be of particular interest. But what is of interest to your listeners, and I think that you would have a very interesting opinion of, is in Chile, and we're seeing this also in France, in Great Britain, in the United States, certainly in Canada, there is a growing political divide between, let's call them just for the sake of ease, call them leftists and anti-leftists. And they hate one another. It's not that they disagree, it's that they hate them and want to silence them. And in some cases, they even want to imprison them. It is a visceral hatred that has gone far beyond any kind of political.
Absolutely.
And this seems to be going on across the Western democracies.
Yeah.
How do you see this ending? In a catastrophic collision, or kind of like everybody wakes up, or tensions simmer? I mean, how do you see this playing out long term across the Western democracies?
I completely agree with you. I have never known a situation where people, instead of just disagreeing with each other, now actually fear and hate each other, which you're increasingly starting to see. Now, that has been taken furthest in the West, in the United States, it seems to me, but it's now starting to appear very visibly in Britain too. I mean, we're not anywhere close to the point the United States has reached, but we're starting to head that way. And that's really, really very, very concerning. And I don't know where this is going to end and how it's going to end. If we go back to a question an earlier viewer asked, which is, about, are we in an oligarchic situation? And we both agree, basically, it's beginning increasingly to look like that. And the fact that these ideas seem to be spread around, basically to make it difficult for, shall we say, I use the old word, the people to sort of assert themselves in the face of this kind of oligarchy. Because what it's risking is a real bust up. Now, I think in Britain, in England, we remain a very stable country, basically. And I think that's not going to happen. In the United States, frankly, listening to some of the way people are talking, I am not so sure. And I've heard people talk for the first time seriously about secession, states seceding from the Union, and potentially resisting attempts by the Union, the federal government, to bring them back under central control. And I never imagined I would ever hear that kind of talk in the United States. And here it is, it's happening now. And I don't know where it ends. If I was an American, I would be very worried about it.
Yes, I'm extremely concerned about it. I lived in the United States for decades, of course, and I've never seen that kind of animosity and unwillingness to listen to the other side. I mean, just dismiss what they have to say, even when they are legitimate grievances that anybody rational and even mildly honest would agree that they are issues, and they are just dismissed and just called, the worst sorts of epithets. That is just, it's just insane. And so I am deeply, deeply concerned. I have a lot of, for some reason, I seem to have a lot of viewers in France, and they consistently tell me that in France, they are all convinced it's going to be a civil war there. Yeah. And I see this everywhere in the West. Yeah. And the question is, how did this happen? Is it an inevitable product of the neoliberal economic model, which is essentially winner take all, and the majority who are losers get absolutely nothing? Is it an inevitable result of that? Is it something else? Is it in the water? Somebody tell me.
No, I think it was made. I think some people set out to make it so, because, as I said, they want to destabilize or deconstruct situations in countries in order to make themselves stronger. I think this is not something that just happened. I think this has been developing over a long time, and as I said, it's intentional and it's deliberate. But this is a huge subject. And again, I wonder whether perhaps this might be a good topic for a program.
Yes, I'd love to have you guys on. I'll get in touch with you, Alex, and Alexander. To both of you gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure.
And thank you, Coach Redfield. Drop your channel in the live stream where people can find you. Coach
I
Red
don't
Pill?
know how to do that. All you have to do is just look up
Just
Coach Red Pill. Yeah.
Okay,
I-
Coach Red Pill. Find
Yeah.
his channel, Coach Red Pill. And Alexander, before Coach Red Pill goes, I will say this. You've done many programs. We've done many programs on Latin America.
Yeah.
And you have said that the general trend of Latin America right now is left.
Absolutely.
Is moving left.
Yes.
Absolutely.
The
No question
general
about it.
trend. Yeah.
No question about it. We also discussed about it. We have actually talked about Chile. I mean, as part of and the things there. And we did mention. I mean, one of the points I mentioned is that not only is it a left wing type of movement that's appeared in Chile, but it's one that seems to have many of the same talking points that you're likely to hear in campuses in San Francisco and places like that.
Yes.
Not the kind of thing I would once have expected in Chile. And that does make me wonder where some of these ideas are coming from. But that is, as I said, definitely a subject that we ought to talk about in a program, because I think that's hugely interesting. And I think we would learn an awful lot. At least I certainly would.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Okay, I'll be in touch with
Thank
you
you,
guys.
Coach Red Pill.
Take it
Absolutely.
easy.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, let's bring in Sergey. Sergey, you are on deck.
Okay.
Yes,
Well, guys,
we
can
hear
we-
you, Sergey.
That's great. First of all, hello, gentlemen, and it's once again a great honor to speak with you on this program. And I will go with my questions. My first question will be about Russia and about underlying processes which is going in the Russian politics. Right now, Putin is for the Russian people, for the Russian senses, Putin is like a gatekeeper into the hell right now, because the opinions of the general Russian population is shifting every year. It's shifting far more into aggressive stance towards the West, because of the all media camping in the Western countries, because of the sanctions, because of all of this conflict. And now I see slowly but surely, I see that the situation is developing into the way that when the Putin will be off of his place, it will be in 6 years and maybe in 12 years. It doesn't important. His successor, he will not have that exact popularity, that exact ratings and charisma, not charisma, but that exact achievements which Putin have, which is allowing him to keep this Russian opinion and Russian strive for revenge, basically, down. And in your opinion, if all these processes will continue further, what will, and it's pretty much possible that after Putin will go, Russia will make some really, really aggressive moves, like blockading Baltic states, or I mean, not only financial blockade, but possibly even military blockade, much like U.S. imposed on Cuba. And any other steps, and many other steps, like in Kazakhstan. How do you think how the Western countries and U.S. in particular will react on this?
Well,
to how extent, yes.
Well, I mean, they would be absolutely horrified, and the idea of facing off against Russia in the Baltic states, I can tell you for an absolute fact. I've actually spoken to people who have some knowledge about these things from the inside. I mean, it is for NATO, for the West, an absolute nightmare. I mean, everybody knows that the Baltic states are basically undefendable, and if there was a serious confrontation there, we would be faced with an enormous crisis. Now, I have to say this. I understand your point, and I think you're making an entirely valid and correct point, which is that something that many people in the West don't fully understand, which is that Putin is in many respects a force for restraint in Russia. He is a force for moderation. There are many people in Russia, you can come across all kinds of Russian websites, by the way, which take a much more forceful and even aggressive line than he does, and a much stronger anti-Western line than he does, and that he's managed to keep all of this under control. And I also agree with you that whoever succeeds him, at least initially, will lack his authority. And that makes for a potentially difficult situation. But I'm still hoping that by that point, by the time that Putin goes, the political and international situation will have started to shift and stabilize to the point where Russians won't need to make these kind of, or won't feel the need to make these kind of strong steps, and that we will avoid the enormous dangers of the kind of scenarios that you discussed. So we're still, I think, some time from that, and Putin is still there, and there's still time to turn things around. So yes, I agree. I think that you made some good points, but I still hope and think that there is time to keep things there. I suspect, by the way, that it is one of the reasons why he is still there. I know that there's many different views about whether Putin wants to go or wants to stay, but I think one of the reasons why he is still where he is and likely to remain is precisely because there was a sense, not just on his part, but within the sort of political elite, that keeping him in place was a guarantee both of the stability of the system internally and of the stability of the international situation at a time when Russia is still very much in a period of transition. So I think that is probably one reason why he's still there at the moment.
Yes, I completely agree with you on this, but the new political powers in Russia, which are emerging right now, and it's not only United Russia, but the real opposition in Russia right now, the guys who really oppose current system, they are far more radical than you can think. Navalny and all these bunches, they are not respected in Russia in any way, and they are not political figures. They are money drained from the West to just to build up their lives. They are grant receivers. But real opposition, real guys who oppose current policies, they are really, really aggressive, and they are frighteningly. Their rhetoric each year it becomes more and more aggressive. To the point when some voices now, and I'm talking about serious political voices, are talking right now that Russia as an empire or as a big state was robbed from its territories in 1990s. That Ukraine, it's maybe independent country, but it's but it should be independent in the borders of 19th century, which is a couple of oblasts, which was Ukraine previously before the communists. Second question I want to ask, it's about the U.S. oligarchy, and basically, as much I am really digging in all of this, and I stumbled about on the few companies in U.S. From like BlackRock and the Vanguard Group, which is basically control much of the entire U.S. and together with its politics and everything else. But I wasn't able to find out who is the owners of these companies, specifically BlackRock and Vanguard. Can you help me on this?
No, not me. I don't know whether Alex has any information about who are the ultimate owners of these companies, but I mean, I have no idea. Perhaps some intelligence agency, or rather, I couldn't tell you. I really don't know.
They have a CEO. They have
CEOs. Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But
the ownership structure, I couldn't tell you about. What I would say is, of course, they have been used by the US and the political and intelligence and military establishment as very much instruments of foreign policy, and quite successfully in some places, by the way.
But this company, BlackRock and Vanguard, it's They are mostly now acting on the internal market of the US. For example, Vanguard is buying real estate in US right now like crazy, and basically this is companies one of the main investors in Goldman Sachs. So basically they control almost the entire US financial system overall.
Yeah.
Only these two companies.
Right. Well, as I said, I mean, I can't tell you much about them. I mean, you know, somebody who perhaps is more familiar with stock market things and things like that will probably be able to answer that question better. I can't give an answer to that one.
I personally think that it will be good thing, but which will never will be made. It's to impose a law that only person can own the company, not the other company own other different companies. Slash funds or funds own companies or investment firms own companies, because it's basically right now you cannot find out about any big company who actually owns it. It's simply impossible to find out. Okay.
Well, we are great believers in transparency at the Duran, and all our structures are very open.
This is what good accountants do, though. They make sure that they make it difficult to find out who owns what.
Basically, this question is connected to what I personally think that U.S. is at this point is now an oligarchy, and it's no way back from this. Essentially, to basically to restore democratic institution in the U.S. need right now tyranny, because well, how tyranny works basically. You have a tyrant, a person, yes, who in odds with all oligarchy. He automatically in odds with all oligarchy just by his nature, because he himself is a part of the oligarchy and he is on top. And to counterbalance the oligarchy, it was in ancient Greece like this. It was in Rome like this. He creates democratic institutions to drain the people into his team, into his apparatus, to basically counterbalance the oligarchy. And eventually he falls, but the democratic institutions, they stay. It's like I see this, you know, from history perspective. I'm sorry, it's
you sound like a classical historian. Are you familiar with the history of ancient Athens? Because of course that's exactly what happened there. There was a tyrant, a dictator called Pisistratos, who undermined the oligarchy by setting up all kinds of institutions, which when he fell, continued to have their life of their own and converted Athens into a democracy. I think that can happen in some places. That was what happened then. But I would be very, very, very wary about assuming it could be reproduced today.
Well, basically, political structure didn't change. People didn't change. It's most important. People were from 2,000 years ago, and people right now, it's basically the same people. And their rules is in the same way, basically. Okay, and my last question, which I want to ask, is about current situation in Europe with the leadership. I know it's I basically ask this every time, but from more I dig information, the more I realize this situation, the more terrified I am. Basically, what I want to ask is about the similarities with Soviet Union. In Soviet Union, it was a system. When you wasn't able to fire bad performing person in leadership position. It was very hard because it always started the investigation. Why this man appeared in this position? Why who was responsible to appointing him on this position? And every such sacking of such person was connected to the pretty much enormous headache for his superiors who decided to sack this person. And the most reliable way to rid of the person you don't want to be near you, to the bad performer, was actually to promote him. It was a different place. And that's how all this played of remarkably bad leaders in the USSR, like Gorbachev and else and all other bunch in the 1990s, appear on the very top, because every time the most incompetent performer was promoted to the higher and higher position, and the most competent performers were staying in the lower position just because these guys are performing good. They're needed on their position. And what I want to ask, does the European Union has the same processes, or maybe it's something different?
I think there is a great deal of similarity, and we've discussed this many times. What I would say, and this is perhaps one certain difference, which is that the European Union, and I've said this many times, structurally wants weak leaders. Doesn't want strong leaders. Certainly doesn't want strong leaders in the states, in the states that make it up, because there they might challenge the structure at the center. But it can't really have a strong figure at the center either, because a strong figure at the center, a competent leader, a good leader, might also cause problems and disruptions. So it is designed to have weak and bad leaders, and that is one of the underlying problems of the whole European Union system.
Okay, fair enough. Basically, it's all my questions.
Thank you, Sergey.
What can I say?
You too.
Thank you, Sergey. Take care.
Take care.
All right. Who do we got here? We got Claire Caw. Let's bring in Claire Caw. Then we got Nayo, Blake, James, and Ruggero to round it out. Then we'll get to some super chats. Claire, you are Claire Caw. You are with us.
Hello. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
A woman, wonderful at last.
Thank you. I did have a question earlier about the operation of democracy and how maybe its actual operation has caused us to get this kind of corrupt and cowardly government. And then while I was listening to you, Alexander, you were also talking about how America in the last century was more solid than China, and I didn't quite get why you thought America was more solid, and I didn't quite understand what you meant by that. So really, I have two questions. One about whether the operation of democracy has brought us to this pretty pass, particularly with regard to indiscriminate universal franchise, and the other one was why you think America was more solid than China is now.
Well, very briefly, by the mid-20th century, the United States had operated under its constitution already for something like 150 years. And that created a very strong sense of political legitimacy and stability around its constitution and the democratic institutions that the constitution created. Whereas the People's Republic of China has only been in existence since 1949. It had a much less stable history through that period of time. It's also grown extremely fast economically. It's come very far and very fast, whereas the US rise was much more incremental. And that sense in America that their political system had existed for a very long time and had succeeded and had been successful over that time, and that period of long incremental economic growth made for a more stable political environment than the one you see in China at the moment. So I think there is a greater brittleness about China. By the way, I mean, I've spoken to people who are China experts and who are sympathetic to China, and they feel that too. And they say that Chinese officials and people that they've spoken to acknowledge it. And when I was there, that was also my feeling about the place. I don't want to give the impression that the Chinese government at the moment doesn't have or command a great deal of support in the country. It does. It's actually popular. But I don't think that popularity for the government is translatable to the same thing as certainty that the political system is stable, and that if you have a different leader, for example, who's less competent than the ones you had up to now, that things will remain as stable as they are. So that's a complicated question, but I think it's rooted in history and in historical experience.
Right. You said it. Well, we were, I guess, talking about the 1950s, and it occurred to me that we're talking about the 1950s,
the 40s and 50s. Absolutely, yes.
Indeed, but do you not think that America was the direct beneficiary of Britain losing its empire after falling twice into its Thucydides trap?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it handed its global empire to America on a platter, more or less.
Oh, absolutely. Of course it did. And the Americans also had a great deal. They had chances. They had luck, good luck, and they used it. I mean, they took advantage of it. Unquestionably, they did. But it's also a question of will. And as I said, the American population in the 1940s and 1950s, it seems to me, was more willing to support a much more active foreign policy than I sense the Chinese population is at the moment. I think in China, they still feel that they've achieved many great things. They want to enjoy them. They want to build up on them. They're not really going outside their country at the moment. This I'm talking about, again, I stress, the Chinese population. They don't want to go around the world and involve themselves in the affairs of the world as a superpower might have to do. China, I just quickly say, the Chinese government, interestingly, constantly says this. It actually says this is not what China wants to do at the moment. And I'm sure it's doing that, partly because it wants to reassure its own population that that's not the plan.
The other thing I would like to say to reassure Western people who must be terrified of China overtaking the West and imposing a kind of global hegemony would be that China is really a society of parents with only children. So that they're not going to be risking the death of their only son for some blind pursuit of glory. So I also wish to point this out.
I'm glad to agree. I mean, I got the impression when I was there, as I said, of a very euphoric society, and of a very, in some ways, actually rather conservative society. In some ways, one that wants to hold on to what it has, feels it's gone very far, very fast, is economically very dynamic, where there's enormous confidence about the economic situation, but which is not, as I said, out to take enormous risks around the world. That was certainly my impression.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose, I think maybe thalassocratic empires, I hope I use the right word correctly, meaning marine empires, they tend to rise up very quickly and very quickly fade away, in the same way that Carthage, Athens and Britain did, and I think the global American empire is also a marine empire, and maybe it's extreme confidence after getting everything on a platter after the British lost their empire might have been the equivalent of a young man winning the lottery and taking enormous risks, and maybe not knowing about things that more mature empires, land empires like Russia, like Iran, like China, would be, looking aghast at, how could you do such a thing?
Well, can I just say, I mean, I think there's some truth in that, but I don't think they just won the lottery. I mean, I think already by the time they reached the 1940s, I mean, they were far and away the world's biggest economy, for example. And I mean, that didn't happen without, things being built up. It wasn't something that was given to them. I mean, they had to build themselves up to that point. And though I think that the United States does have some elements of a thalassocracy, it's easy for me to say in Greek, thalassocracy. I think also it is a huge continental country, which I think, you know, we mustn't underrate. What I
commanding
think
both
is,
sides, yes, both
yes,
oceans.
absolutely. What I think is true, and I think this is one reason why America's diplomatic skills perhaps do not match its power, is that the United States has never had, at any point in its history, a period of time when it has had to negotiate with countries that border it and are its equals. It has always dominated its surrounding space. And I think this is something that has become very much part of America's DNA. And I think the difference with a country like, say, Russia, which on the contrary has had to assemble itself very incrementally, very painstakingly over many centuries in the middle of a continental landmass, or indeed China, which has this enormous civilizational history going back thousands of years. They, on the contrary, have had to work and negotiate and deal with and cut deals with people over many centuries. And I think they have, as a result, a much stronger diplomatic tradition to fall back up on than the United States does.
Mm-hmm. And the last question I wanted to ask was whether it seems to me that George Washington didn't really approve of political parties. And maybe the reason why China is doing so well is that it actually has a rational political system. It doesn't have to fight year-long political campaigns, which are enormously divisive and expensive and time-wasting. And they just choose the best one, you know, who'd been in the party for about 20 years, because the career path of anyone who joins the Communist Party is that, you know, it takes about 20 years to get to the top if you're going to get to the top. And you are well trained because they put you here, they put you there, and, you know, assess you. And maybe that's a reason why China gets better, smarter politicians than the ones we get in the West. And maybe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, first of all, I mean, I agree with you about George Washington. I mean, but that was also, by the way, a general view in the United States at the time of its establishment and of the Constitution. There was a lot of skepticism about whether parties were a good thing and whether, in fact, they might not turn out to be oligarchic instruments. Well, that's not entirely. Some would say that was a prescient thing. But having said that, having an alternation of power, having people with different ideas who are able to operate actively within a political system, does, it seems to me, have an advantage in that it prevents the system becoming stagnant and complacent. Now, the Chinese system at the moment isn't either of those things, it seems to me. I mean, I think that you've got to say that the Communist Party of China, whatever else it is, it's neither stagnant nor it's complacent. But such things can happen to systems where, as I said, there isn't a great interchange of ideas. I mean, it did happen in the Soviet Union, for example, as I very well remember. By the time of the 1980s, the Soviet Communist Party was exhausted. It had basically abolished all alternatives to itself. There were no other poles of ideas or of power, and it had run out of ideas itself. So that's always a risk. That's one of the factors which, provided political competition can be contained within a strong constitution, which is what the United States has. Having open political competition can actually be both a source of dynamism and a stability. And I think that was something that the United States did achieve at one point in the 20th century, but which I think perhaps it's losing now.
But don't you think, as a lawyer, that the rights that you have as a member of a political party will have an effect on how prepared you are to question the leadership and its policies? So
No.
I know that Article 3 of the Chinese Communist Party actually says you have a legal right to criticize party policy and that kind of thing. But in any political party in the UK, for instance, the Conservative Party, the secretary of the board of the Conservative Party has an absolute discretion to remove you for whatever reason. So once you're out on your ear, you're tainted goods.
Yeah.
And that's why people are cowardly and they won't defend the principle. If they accidentally speak the truth, they'll apologize for it.
Of course, but you mustn't assume that because that right is there, it can be upheld or enforced or is real. As used to be said by many people, the Soviet Constitution in words was extremely democratic, but the reality was otherwise. I have to say, I think the idea that a Chinese party member could stand up in a forum and say, openly criticize Xi Jinping and the direction of Chinese economic or policy on whatever subject, I think that a party member who did that might find himself or herself in some difficulties. I accept that they can talk about other things, but you see, there are limits on what you probably can talk about in China. And I mean, I know there are, because again, I've talked to people who are familiar with the system. So there is what is theoretically exists, and what is actual, and what is real.
Yes, whether people will defend their, First Amendment rights or, it's all there. But do Americans feel that their constitutional rights are being protected? It doesn't seem to be so.
Well, this is exactly the other point, because of course the other concern I have, and I've expressed this in program after program and in discussion after discussion, is that there is quite clearly a movement in the United States today to make large parts of the Constitution, including the First Amendment, effectively inoperable. So it exists rather like the Soviet Constitution did. It's words on a page, but words which once had meaning in the case of the United States, but are increasingly losing it. And that calls into question the stability of the United States, because you are when you're doing that kind of thing, you are tearing down that very political, constitutional, and legal structure, which was provided the underpinning of American stability. So, it could be that we're going to face a world where China is still not fully stable, and the United States is making itself less stable. And that is a very unnerving thought.
Yes, because fundamentally, America is a global empire that hasn't actually acknowledged that it is a global empire. And the American people are saying, no, we don't want any of these supposed benefits of neoliberalism and neoconservatism. We don't want it no more. And Trump was representing their interests, and look what happened to him. So I guess for any government, it rests on the confidence of its people. And if its people doubt the integrity of its leaders and government, then the centre cannot hold.
Yeah, well, indeed, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and please come again.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care. Yeah, the centre cannot hold, Alexander, if you don't have a good leader.
The centre cannot hold. It's from W.B. Yeats's poem, The Second Coming. The centre cannot hold, and the next line, or one of those lines, is that the best lose all conviction and the worst are filled with a passionate intensity. Yeah. Well, that perhaps reminds you very much of what's happening in the United States at the moment.
If you don't have a good leader, nothing gets done.
Yeah.
Nothing happens. That's the bottom line. If you have a good CEO, company's going to do well.
Yeah.
If you have a crappy CEO, well, it's going to go into the crapper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me do two quick super chats. One super chat, two super chats, but one theme, and that's Cosmic Rain, who says, "Hey lads, formerly Moon Swan Silverlight here. Unfortunately, I no longer get notified of your live streams. I just caught this by accident. Hope you lads are doing well." Thank you very much, Cosmic Rain, for that, because Cosmic Rain sent another super chat, a 50-pound super chat, which says, "Can I get a happy belated 38th birthday?" It was yesterday.
Well,
Might cheer me up a bit. Oh, and here's a bigger donation than usual since I'm feeling really generous, and you lads deserve it. Keep it up. Keep up the good word. Keep up the good work, lads. Love you guys. Happy birthday.
Happy
Cosmic
birthday.
Rain.
Absolutely. Happy birthday. Happy 38th birthday.
And thank you for those super chats. We wish you a great birthday and all the best from us to you. Let's go to some more callers. We got Nayo. Nayo is going to be added to the stream. Are you with us, Nayo?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello.
Hey guys. Just really kind of excited to be here, actually. You guys are the best. Like, really the best.
Great to have you here.
Yeah. So you guys were all talking about USA and China, like who's going to be like the next, or who's going to have more sway. And I think we're always talking too much about them and not the rest of the world. Probably they will help determine a lot of this. I think that it is not just from Beijing or Washington that can control everything. And obviously Russia actually showed me that that's like another independent player, like a game changer, and I always think that they have more thing and everything that the COVID actually taught me. Sorry. All the essential stuff, it all comes from there. And we, like, what do we have to offer to like African countries, like I don't know, Twitter and stuff, but if they need a microwave and like real things and change the quality of life. So I see a lot of problems like structurally that China has like taken over, like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know if you guys know about that, but kind of the lower end of the just 21st century, you should be able to live that way, like kind of like a water, house, and these are all things that I think they have a huge advantage on. And given that the rest of the world needs these things, that we can't just like the dollar is really what's keeping us in here, I think. But yeah, I don't know if we can change the status quo. And a lot of the big companies, they're also very much interested in investing over there. There's going to be a lot more people that want to eat at McDonald's in China, just based on how many people that want to eat. Like Asia in general is, I don't know if like we can go back now. It's Trump needed to come in maybe 10 years, 10 years earlier. I feel that would really have, could have changed the course. And I think we are kind of just woken up the next day and realizing that it's like structurally the path is we're moving forward. I'm a little nervous today, so just that's all I had to say, and I really enjoy your show.
Well, thank you. I think your first point actually about the fact that there are many other players, and that we mustn't get completely absorbed with the Chinese-America duel is absolutely spot on. I think this is a different kind of confrontation from the one that happened during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. If you looked at the world in 1950, I mean, at that time, it was absolutely clear that there were only two great powers left in the world at that time. There was the United States and there was the Soviet Union. I mean, Britain was still there, but as became very quickly clear, it had been mortally wounded as a great power by the world wars that it fought in the previous half of the century. So at that time, it was the Soviets and the Americans facing off, and there was no real other party, no other country in the world that could stand up and challenge them. this is not the situation today. America and China have to fight out their duel, if it is going to become a duel, in the context of a much more complicated international system where there are multiple players. You mentioned Russia, there's India, there's potentially Brazil, there's Japan, there's South Africa conceivably, Iran, Turkey, Germany conceivably, and all sorts of countries, all of them maneuvering for position, trying to find their way round and deciding what role they're going to play in this system, which is now in flux. So I think you're absolutely right about that. And the second point that you made, which I think is I hope you're wrong, but I'm afraid that I think you may be right, which is that reform in the form of Donald Trump getting elected and trying to change things may indeed have come too late to the United States, and that might partly explain why it didn't succeed. If there'd been a Donald Trump figure perhaps coming to power in the 2000s or the 1990s, might have been very different. But I hope that there is time to turn things round. I would like to think there is, but we will have to see.
Yeah, I noticed they really only just encouraged our oligarchy.
No.
They just helped it come true, I suppose.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, indeed, they did. Yeah. Well, oligarchs always want to be oligarchs. Never forget that. And there are always people who want to be oligarchs. And if you put them in a position where they can achieve it, well, of course they do.
Like, could we not have a 12-year system? Like, just have Trump in for 12 years. I think all this anyway.
If you have a good leader,
if
you have a good leader, you hold on to them.
Yeah.
But the system in the U.S. is different. But
yes,
if we talk about someone like Putin or these types of leaders, if they're doing a good job, then why do you want to get rid of them?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, thank you,
Dio. Take care. Let's go to, where are we? Blake, you are on deck.
Hi, fellas. How are we?
Hey, Blake, how are you doing?
It's been a long time since I've been on here. So firstly, I'd like to start with, would you guys like to ask me any questions about Australia? I can talk about Australia, but go for it.
What is your lockdown situation? What are the facts?
Okay. Let me just think for a minute here. Maybe not a minute.
What can you say? Well, what can you say as far as all our viewers are listening? What are the facts? Is it in such a strict lockdown? Is it not? Is it just certain areas?
It's certain areas. I'm in WA. Probably with Western Australia. We've got Mark McGowan, who's very quick to lock everything down, also shut off the borders. He is held up as the standard. I mean, he's opinion polling and he had a wipeout against the Conservative Party over here as a result. But it is very interesting over here at the moment. People are starting to get fed up with it. I can tell on the ground. People are very annoyed about it. And also what's occurring in Australia is we're very quick to lock down, and what's being used to justify it is that the vaccine rollout, we're only at about 9-10%, I think, at the moment, which was, sorry, I should be diplomatic, shouldn't I, with my words? Yes.
Coup, shot, jab.
Yes, okay. Inoculation, is that fine? Yep, okay. So basically the inoculation rollout over here, that has not gone to plan because AZ was demonized to no end about its side effects compared to PF's side effects. So it botched everything up, which is very weird because they both seem to have side effects. But anyway, so Scott Morrison's actually getting a lot of flack over that, and his opinion polling is plummeting. The latest polls is Labor is 53 and he's 47, which will put Labor federally quite easily into power by probably 10 to 15 seats if that's replicated. So that's what's going on there. What's I think is happening when it comes to the state governments, which is the problem, and their Labor premiers, is that the power is going to their head a bit. They like the situation and they like dragging it out. And even New South Wales, which is our largest state and had a Liberal Conservative premier, she has now backflipped because of media pressure, and also they did bungle like having partial lockdowns and tracking, and that they had a big outburst recently of Delta outbreak. She's backflipped, and they were the only state that never fully locked down ever. Now it's fully locked down as a result. So that's what's going on in Australia. I think over here in WA, I think they will shut down the borders to South Australia and Queensland and the Northern Territory pretty soon because of what's going on in New South Wales, because they can't contain it at the moment. But we'll see what happens there. But people are starting to get fed up, and there are some very interesting developments on that. Interestingly, Sky News which of course is Murdoch owned, is pushing very hard against the lockdowns, and now they loved Gladys Berejiklian, the Premier of New South Wales, but they've gone 180 on her, and now they hate her so it's very interesting. I know the Murdoch press is not the best in some regards, and he has a big monopoly here, but at least there is one media outlet that is like talking about talking about anti-lockdown freedom stuff. Yeah.
You paint a pretty grim picture is what the vibe that I'm getting.
Yeah, we still, like in WA, I still have my rights. We're not in lockdown anymore. So we can basically, we can't really leave the state. Otherwise, we're subject to a 14-day. So say if I was to leave to go to Victoria, I could do that, or go to New South Wales. But if I wanted to come back, I would have to come back and be isolated in a hotel for 14 days and pay for that.
Jeez. At
the moment, that happens in some cases, doesn't happen in others, just depends. But yeah, that's the situation of it. But internally in WA, I can do whatever I like. So at the moment, we did have a bit of an outbreak, but now we've gone back to no restrictions apart from other states. And Perth is the most isolated city, one of the most isolated major cities in the world. So that gives us a unique advantage, but so we can do that. But yeah.
It really is, Alexander Blake, the Chinese model. I think you mentioned that, Alexander.
Absolutely.
That Australia has definitely followed the Chinese model in that
absolutely
they're literally cordoning off areas within their own country, just much like China did to the Wuhan district. Australia's just doing the same thing.
Absolutely. And by the way, this is becoming increasingly the Asian model, as I understand it, because I gather this is also the trend in several other Asian countries too. And yet now it's been taken up by Australia also, which is interesting. So on this, it's followed the regional trendsetter, which is China. And you'd have thought that, Australia, being so profoundly different from China, would have taken a completely different course. Interesting. Sad.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that, because all that Mark McGowan and the other premiers, and he's kind of the gold standard, and that then everyone started emulating, let's say. All he says is, I'm following the health advice. Oh, I'm just following the health advice. It's very interesting. Over here, it's becoming, and as actually Sky News puts it, and it's Alan Jones particularly, they're kind of giving their authority over to the health, kind of similar to what a lot of people say about Fauci in the US. It's kind of the same thing. What they do is the premiers announce things, and then they bring in the health officer. And if anything goes wrong, they go, oh, that's what the health officer told me. But then they take, and it's very bizarre over here in WA. It's starting to change, but Mark McGowan got this cult-like celebrity status where people go and want to get selfies with him on the street, and it's very bizarre. And people, it's gotten better now, but I remember telling people like he's still a politician at the end of the day. He's not. There's also his own ambition and his own motive in it as well.
Yeah.
We got the same thing, Blake. These scientists, I mean, they're doing photo shoots on the cover of magazines, like fashion magazines. We got some of the scientists here as well doing that stuff. So, I mean, they become rock stars to a certain segment of society.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's just, it's crazy. But I think what's going on a lot here as well is there's a sentiment of there are a lot of people who don't want to get the vaccine, don't want to get the inoculation for their own reason. They don't want to get it for their own reason, but we have premiers, and Mark McGowan's one of them, saying that we need 80% vaccinations before lockdowns will not be used anymore, which I think, looking at the UK as an example, Alexander, if you could elaborate actually for me a bit over what is it right at 60%? Boris has basically started no more lockdowns. Is that like?
Well, that was what he said. I mean, we were supposed to have Freedom Day on Monday, but I mean, it's not really happened. I mean, if you go to Britain, if you come to London, you will see that London today is much as it was yesterday, because though officially it's still Freedom Day, in practice there've been so many restrictions still kept that it hasn't really changed anything. I think he wanted to change things, but in the end he decided that he couldn't because, well, the pressure's on him too.
Is it correct to say, Alexander, that I think everyone is pretty much accepted the fact that the UK will go into another lockdown sooner or later? That's the vibe that I'm getting from all kinds of different outlets, left, center, and right.
It is what I believe, and it is what a lot of people think. Of course, the government says otherwise, but then I don't really think anybody believes what the government says on this issue. At least I don't. But that's what I personally believe.
But I find this interesting. Like I've seen it here with the Conservative governments. They seem to they want to hold, because the right over here, and like I said with Sky News, are pushing like a freedom angle all the time over this stuff. But they seem to acquiesce to the rest of the media under the pressure. Like this is what Scott Morrison did with the rollout. And has Boris done the same thing? Is he backing down because of pressure? The media pressure. There were, at the end of the day, it all seems to come down to the polling at the end. If things start to affect their polling, they backflip pretty quickly, right or left, most of the time. Yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, I would add that if you're talking about Britain, it isn't just internal pressure. The United States has just said that Britain is assessed for American travelers as a high-risk country. Now, let us give an example. Lots of British academic institutions depend on American students. So, if they're not coming, that puts pressure. Those institutions will then start saying, well, we've got to do something to appease the Americans. So you get all of this, it all ties in.
Blake, did you say that Australia was not too hip on the AZ shot? That there was a concerted attack? Alexander, why is it seems that the UK is under assault from all sides. And just take away the medicine of it, but it seems like the AZ shot and traveling for people in the UK, it seems that every country wants to punish the UK for a certain reason.
Well, we lost our biggest potential friend, who we largely spurned.
It is political. Yeah. There is a political angle to this.
Absolutely, is there not? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think also it has to be said. I mean, the British don't always come across particularly well in international affairs. I mean, we've been rude to the Russians, unbelievably so. We've been rude to the Chinese recently, again, exceedingly so. But the main issues, the main relationships are Europe and the United States. Well, Europe, the situation was always going to be difficult because of Brexit. And I think a lot of people in Britain thought that with the US, it would be easier. And for some people, the point of Brexit was to get closer to the US, which was seen as a country, as a society, culturally closer to Britain, with many more similarities to Britain than Europe does. And of course, what they've now got is a hostile administration in Washington. And that has come as a real shock, and something that, again, a lot of people in Britain don't really know how to respond to.
Yeah. Australia, too, to go after the UK is very,
well, it is
very telling.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very telling. I mean, I think we do still convey a degree of arrogance sometimes in the way we conduct our international relations and behave as if we are more powerful than we actually are, which I don't think goes down very well around the world. And that's saying it mildly.
All right. Blake, anything else you want to convey to everybody from Australia? What's going on?
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you for talking about asking me about that, because I have noticed you guys made a few comments in some of your streams about Australia, and but like, are the lockdowns still going on? Like, from what I can see, they still go on in some countries, but they don't go on in other countries. But from what you're saying, the Britain's going to go down a similar path. Well, it's interesting you say it's an Asian model. That's an interesting concept that's developing.
Well, it is. It is. It is. Yeah.
I didn't think of it. I've actually not heard of it said like that. So thanks.
No, I'm sure it's not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there we go. Just changing gear a little bit. Alexander, you were talking earlier about rise and falls of empires, and you were using the Greek. You were using the Greek dictator, and how then democracies. I can't remember his name yet.
Pisistratos, not an easy name to remember. Doesn't roll off the tongue easily, but his name was Pisistratos.
Do you, a bit later on, and what always, firstly, I'll just go to a historical question. What are your thoughts on Julius Caesar? Do you think he was benevolent and would have changed things for the more? He would have reformed it, and do you think it is still possible to have a figure like that in the US?
Oh, golly. I mean, yeah. History, we're certainly going into history. Julius Caesar was an exceptional personality, tremendous general, tremendous politician, a tremendous lawyer, by the way. People don't realize this, but the calendar that we use today is a piece of Roman legislation, which is still in place. It was he who created the 12 months of the year and gave them their numbers and sorted out the 7-day week and all the rest. And of course, the month of July is named after him. Most people don't actually know that. So he was a tremendous personality, and he did intend to carry out various reforms. And of course, perhaps he wouldn't have succeeded in those reforms, or perhaps he would have done. We just don't know. But do we have anyone like that at the moment? The answer is no. Are we likely to? I have to say also the answer is no. I mean, for one thing, he was a once in a millennium force. I mean, he was a political genius, and there aren't many of those at any time in history.
Okay. Just on another comment you made about the Chinese population not wanting to be expansionist or an empire. It's interesting you say that, because China seems to have this, I think it's a Confucius cultural part of their civilization, that China's always tends to, in time, come and look back inward. And a good example of this was the treasure fleets in the 15th century. And a lot of people don't know this, but if China had actually gone on with that program, they would have colonized all of Southeast Asia. And they would have been there before the Europeans 2 centuries earlier. But after the, I can't remember the emperor, the Yongli emperor, I think it was.
Yeah, it was indeed.
Yes, that's it. After he passed away, the new emperor was much more conservative, and he retracted things. So, it actually frustrates me a bit, because people in Australia are very anti-Chinese Like they're very worried about this imperialistic, and that's what's being pumped into everyone's head. But they don't understand that's more, let's say, it's more of a recent thing, and it's more of a reaction on the Communist parties. It's not a Chinese thing. It's more the Communist Party of China trying to protect China from what they perceive as a imperialist threat. And I don't think it's going to last. And it's mainly in the form of Xi at the moment. I mean, the previous leaderships were nowhere near like what the way Xi is. So, anyway.
Well, the Chinese there's a very great deal of Chinese assertiveness at the moment. And I think it's partly also because the Chinese want to reassure themselves that they are a great power, that they want to tell themselves, look, those terrible times that we had between the 1830s and the 1940s, when China nearly became nearly disintegrated and was fought over by the external powers, and was a victim of a terrible war launched against it by Japan. The Chinese want to reassure themselves that that's over, that China once again is back, that it's a strong power, that it can look after itself, that it can make others mind their business, and that they don't meddle with China. And, Chinese nationalism and Chinese patriotism is also a tremendously important force, and one under no circumstances to be underestimated. But at the same time, and this is the other point, I think you're basically right about the Chinese culture, that they stay at home in terms of they don't set out to conquer the world. I mean, we've never had a Chinese leader in the past who's ever had that kind of ambition. But I mean, I think that what I was referring to is also a sense in China that we've achieved all of this over the last 30 years. It's been very hard work for many of us. Let's enjoy it now, and let's not risk it by embarking on foreign adventures that could get us into sort of serious trouble. I think that is a nervousness which is not perhaps fully understood outside China. So on the one hand, there's assertiveness, and on the other hand, there is a certain nervousness too.
I'll make this my last point, because I just remembered it. Just going back to Australia, this question I'll say to you, Alex, and maybe something for you to follow, for both of you to follow. There's an interesting case in Australia at the moment. There's a YouTuber called Friendly Geordies. At the moment, and he was he's quite popular. He's a comedian, so he is very biased towards the left and the Labor Party, but he's been particularly targeting a politician in the New South Wales government, the Deputy Premier, John Barilaro, who's he's a national, which they're like the country Conservatives over here. Anyway, he's basically been making all these accusations and bringing up some facts. And anyway, this Premier has used anti-terrorism laws, so terrorism laws meant for terrorism, to basically so he's suing the YouTuber for defamation, and then he's used the terrorism laws against one of the YouTuber's employees to arrest him under the pretext he was stalking him. So the Anti-Fixated Persons Unit, it's called. It's a very draconian use of powers. It's a very concerning development for freedom of press in Australia, and even Sky News and the right are very alarmed by this and are concerned. So that's the case for you guys to have a look at. And basically, it's basically being used by the Deputy Premier of New South Wales as an intimidation tactic. And I know you're a lawyer, Alex, and this is quite a common tactic, isn't it? That they will try and do things to make the other party back down from. Could you? Do you know what?
I do exactly what you mean. And look, I'm not familiar with this Australian legislation. I should say we have similar legislation being cooked up here in Britain. But I would be extremely interested to know about that, because one of the very first cases, legal cases in Australia that I ever studied was the Spycatcher case, which I'm sure you're familiar with, from the 80s. And that always gave me the impression that the Australians are much more open and transparent than we are here. So the things are going in the opposite direction is so ominous that I would definitely want to look into that. And thank you for alerting me to it.
Yeah, it's very it is very concerning. What was it? So what he used. Anyway, I can't remember. But do you guys want look him up, Friendly Geordies? Do you want me to send you a link or anything?
Yeah, send us a link. We'll look it up and.
Because it would be something good.
Put something together. Yeah.
Probably something to do a show or talk about.
Yeah,
but anyway,
absolutely.
thank you guys so much for your time.
Blake. Thank you, Blake. Take care. Okay, Alexander, I'm going to bring in Susan, and then we got, I know that you're also running a little low on time. Then we got Ruggiero, James.
Oh, dear. Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
So I'll bring in Susan, but let's do some real quick super chats. Let's run through the super chats. Barry says, can we do a show on Erdogan's visit to Northern Cyprus and what Greece should do? Yes, we'll actually do a show on that.
Absolutely. So we will certainly do that.
Yeah, we'll do a show on that. So we'll address that. Alexander, we have a 48-pound super chat, gentlemen. Simon's comments about the reverse repo market directly relates to Basel III changes. Repo market is now open to non-bank entities due to FOMC. That and B3 funding ratios means big changes for commercial banks heading down. That's the main point, heading down. We're going to have to address this stuff as well, Alexander, what's going on. Thank you very much for that super chat. Rich says the so-called frugal countries of the North Europe aren't so. They have sucked the economic system of Southern Europe. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mark Hewitt says, why has the MSM not reported on India's recovery from its coup problems for a couple of months ago? Nothing to do with the use of IVER, I can't even say it, or HCQ. Absolutely. It's been documented, Mark.
Yes.
It has been documented, and you're on point. Theodore Gipulin sends us a super sticker. GEC says, adding to Mark's comment, also not reported, the variant spread came directly from massive shot push in India and Nepal, usually during 30 degrees Celsius plus weather. Name changed to Delta to take attention away from this. Alexander, I've actually done a video a while ago on the marketing ploy for using the Greek alphabet.
Right.
The deltas, the sigmas, the epsilons, and the rebranding of these things. Thank you very much for that super chat. And we have a couple of more, Alexander. We'll get to the calls. Mark Hewitt, how much more will it take the Scottish people to turn against the SNP after the revelation of financial irregularities? Do you want to address that real quick, Alexander? How much more will it take?
An awful lot. I mean, there was an awful lot of problems that took place in Scotland before the elections, the recent Scottish parliamentary elections. I did seriously wonder whether the SNP would actually hold together, and it did. It managed to win very, very strongly. So I think it will take an enormous amount of scandal and revelation before the Scottish people turn on it. For the moment, it continues to ride the independence bandwagon, the independence wave, and there's no sign for the moment of that momentum ebbing. So we'll just have to see. But that's how it looks to me. I thought before the Scottish Parliament elections that we might see a slippage in its support, and I was surprised that we didn't.
All right. Ben Hayes says everyone needs to go out and plant a tree this week. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Ben. And we just have a couple of more, Alexander, and then we'll get to Susan. Merkel coming to Washington and lecturing from Flying Board. Merkel coming to Washington, lecturing Russia on passing gas through Ukraine. She is in no position of doing that after the mess caused on Ukraine and Russia since 2014.
I absolutely agree. And I would add something else. She said that Ukraine has a right to have the gas pass through its territory. What right? I mean, what is this right that we suddenly hear about Ukraine having a right to be
after she crushed? Anyway, Merkel. We've done shows on how Merkel betrayed Ukraine.
I mean, it's supposed to be a commercial deal, a commercial matter. What right does anybody have to trade with someone else? I mean, why should you force someone to transfer your gas through your territory? I mean, that isn't a free competition or free trade or anything. It's a bizarre thing what Merkel said.
All right. Kurt Frab says, great show and my favorite geopolitical news channel. By the way, I have developed an app which can integrate censorship-proof platform with your channel. Kurt, send me an email. Let me know about the app. I'm very interested to take a look at that. From Flying Boar, the Russians living in Baltic countries, they are treated like second-class citizens. Why are they even living there? Why don't they move to Russia? This is actually the case in Latvia.
Yeah, I know it's
talk about that in Latvia.
I know there is, and I mean I know some have, and I know that's what the governments of the Baltic states want. I don't know enough about the reasons why people stay, but I suspect it's always difficult to force people to give up and leave their homes.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. But Russell Hall says Western politicians aren't fools, but quislings. Very true. From Powerful PE is a new member to the Duran community. Welcome, Powerful PE. And we just have a couple of more here. Sentinel. Almost no footage of the protests in London yesterday. So much for GB News. Excellent reporting as usual, guys. Yeah, very little coverage, Alexander.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Very little coverage indeed. All about Freedom Day, which, as we said, was a damn squib.
Yeah. GB News is a bust. My Raul Pinto says my Build Back Better plan will be a force of achieving lower prices for Americans looking ahead. Biden at the White House. Is Biden gaslighting his followers or genuinely believes it? He's reading a script, man.
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
if he can even read it right at times. Great super chat. That's it. One more that just came in from Amrit. Can an Italy leader opposed to the EU cause a stop to the plans of France and Germany? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they're strong enough.
If they're strong enough, that's the trouble.
Yeah. All right. Susan, I'm bringing you in. And Susan, Ruggiero, and James. Susan, are you with us? And we also have Zahir.
Hello, boys.
Hello,
Thanks
Susan.
for having me on. Hi. I'm calling from Melbourne, Australia, the communist capital of Australia. So unlike Blake, we're having a little bit of a more morbid experience over here. Where basically, as he mentioned, the eastern states are taking turns at having lockdowns. And I think I've discovered the reason why they're taking turns and why the state premiers are taking turns at grandstanding in front of the national as well as the state media, while Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, just stands back looking dazed and confused because he knows he's not allowed. What do you think of that, Alexander?
Susan, thank you.
I'm rather cross
I think you said.
I think we're absolutely overwhelmed. Actually, that's a deluge of absolutely extraordinary internet. And I mean, I think the only thing I can say. I mean, you asked me what can I say about that? All I can say is thank you, Susan, for this incredibly enlightening information that you've given us. I mean, it's quite remarkable, actually. Poor Australia is all I can say.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all I can.
Yeah.
I think I can say in response to all of that. Yeah.
Susan,
I feel like, yes, Alex, sorry.
Yes, go ahead. You feel
I feel like we are very much being led around the garden path by the media, as Blake was indicating. And I do actually agree with him about the Murdoch press. They are actually playing a decent role because they're the only ones who are big enough to actually be able to disagree with government. But at the same time, they're not going back to the politics policy. You know what I mean? They're not going back to the national policy and pointing at the facts and saying, okay, guys, you're just playing a merry-go-round with the different pharma companies. They own the agenda. They own the Australian government, clearly, and they're just taking turns based on this national policy. And they've also not, as far as I can see, they've never actually brought up Fauci's presence, or the Fauci influence presence, I should say, regarding this new mRNA advisory group in Australia. I've never heard them talking about manufacturing mRNA therapy in Australia. And I'll tell you what, at the beginning of COVID, the University of Flinders in Adelaide, South Australia, came up with a very viable prototype vaccine that they'd already tested on animals right at the beginning of the crisis. South Australia has the leading medical research university facilities in the country, and Scott Morrison refused to fund them, so they couldn't get to human trials. And that was previously broadly known in Australia. They got dropped. They've been pushed out. And of course, it's because, you know, they've been waiting to bring in Moderna all along and to actually manufacture it in Victoria, the communist state.
Well, Susan, I think we're still live, which is incredible. I'm surprised that YouTube has not shut this stream down.
Oops.
So,
sorry, guys.
It's all right. Thank you very much, Susan, for everything. Alexander, I know that you're pressed on time. Do you have time for 2 calls?
Yeah, I do have.
Okay. Okay, great. We have a couple more calls. Susan, thank you very much. And
no worries. And let's free Julian Assange. Let's not forget about Melbourne Julian as well.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. All right. Take care, Thanks, Susan. Guys. Thank you very much. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay, let's do Ruggiero, James. Ruggiero, I'm going to add you to the stream. Ruggiero, you with us?
Hey, Alex, how's it going?
How you doing?
Good. I think probably better than you. 3 hours and counting.
Well,
yeah, we're hanging in there. We've done longer.
We have indeed.
This is some marathon, man. Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, crazy time we live in. There's so much to go over, but I'm going to try and keep it short. I don't want to keep you guys much longer than this. Couple of things that come to mind. I'm actually born South African, and I now live in Italy. Work with a US-based company, so quite a bit of exposure, internationally with different sort of political views and so on. What I find kind of scary at the moment in the US is the whole critical race theory thing, particularly because of my exposure to something that's practically exactly the same in South Africa. So directly after the 94 elections, of course, the schooling system was, let's say, structured in such a way to make sure that white people realize just how bad and evil they are. And that's been going on for decades. In fact, it's kind of one of the reasons why at a certain point I felt like I was forced to leave, because you kind of start to feel like you got a target on your back because you got the wrong color skin. So despite the fact that I was born in 81 and had absolutely nothing to do with anything that happened prior to that, of course, you get punished anyway because, how dare you be white? So, and it's funny to me that the whole world will just not accept the possibility that, people can be racist towards whites, because believe me, it really, really can. So what I'm seeing in the US really, really scares me and concerns me, because it's the exact same kind of narrative that's going on there. And I mean, I don't think I need to tell you guys what the state of South Africa is right now. So I'm just putting that out there. Everybody says America and South Africa is different. Yes, sure, it's different, but I don't need to know, or rather, I don't need to let me rephrase. Looking at China and Russia and Cuba, that's enough for me to know that communism isn't going to work in the US or anywhere else either. So, I mean, the fact that we're different, yes, that's true, but, principles are principles, and this one is a really bad one, and it's leading down the wrong path, in my opinion.
I'm afraid you're right. And I also have to say, I agree with you that there are similarities between the situation in South Africa now and that in the US. And it's certainly something people should be aware of. I think that saying that they're not the same is true, but it's not a question of whether they're the same or not. It's whether the direction of travel is the same. And that, it seems to me, to some extent is the case. And that's very disturbing.
Right, exactly. All right, so I'll just move on real quick here. I don't want to drag you guys on for too much longer, but the other thing that really bothers me is the direction that social media is heading. That is terrifying. I mean, I watched Facebook sort of start, and it was great. I mean, it was a great place, a great way to connect with people and so on. But I don't know what it's become now. I mean, like I'm pretty much off the platform at this point. I still remember a moment when I shared a mainstream news article, and that got fact checked. And that was a mainstream article, you know, and it got fact checked. And I was like, okay, I mean, that's the end. I mean, that was the end of it for me. So that's when I basically pulled out of social media entirely, just about. And it's terrifying to watch that they are truly just controlling entirely the narrative. And this whole situation where now governments are starting to cooperate with you know, these social media platforms, you know, to get their narrative out. It's a truly terrifying sort of concept. I don't think people realize just how dangerous that is when you've got, you know, sort of a one-minded, everybody believes the same thing. I mean, you know, when you look back in history, when you look at, I mean, how do you think the Nazis started? I mean, it's the same kind of thing, right? People don't realize that we're going down that same road.
Well, I careful about saying things like that. But fundamentally, I agree with you. I think this degree of control is extremely disturbing, and I think that is, again, part of the various things which, if you put them together, make up all of the things that, you know, show us that we're going in the wrong way, exactly the wrong road, as exactly you said.
Yes. Wow, sorry, apologies for that. I know I need to watch my words, especially on YouTube. I need to check that a bit more. One other thing I wanted to ask you, Alexander, how is it possible that an unelected bureaucrat ends up becoming the prime minister of a country? Because the first time in my life I've ever seen that, and that's in Italy. And it's apparently it's not the first time either.
It's happened twice in Italy and once in Greece, actually.
Absolutely, indeed, and it's going to happen increasingly. Well, how does it happen? You join the European Union, and you find that it happens because that's what the European Union is all about. It destabilizes your government and finds the the highly competent, apolitical technocrat who's going to sort out everything and do it all that way. And of course, we don't need to worry about messy things like elections before in order to put him where he is. But you know, we've seen that with him with Mario Draghi in Italy. We saw that with Monti in Italy, and I can't remember, believe it or not, the name of the man in Greece. Alex will remember his name, but anyway, whatever.
I forgot the guy too, Alexander.
Absolutely,
that's how irrelevant he was.
Absolutely,
I mean, for us, but
absolutely,
he dragged the country down.
Absolutely,
I don't know. Anybody in the chat, remind us.
Exactly, but we will get more people like this in Europe, in Southern Europe, if we allow the political structures of the EU and the economic structures to continue dictating to us in this way, because that is the logical endpoint of it. I mean, ultimately, bear in mind that you can elect a leader in Greece. It doesn't make any real difference because the decisions aren't made in Athens; they're made in Brussels and Berlin to some extent, and in Frankfurt. So I mean, it's having a technocrat in charge, an unelected, unappointed, unelected technocrat running your affairs. It's not really so different from what we have all the time. Now we're doing a lot of programs on Italy. We've developed a relationship with Italian channel, and we're going to be doing a lot more about Italy and exploring the situation in Italy in more detail. And keep an eye on our channel, and you'll find out. We'll find out too an awful lot more about Italy from people who are actually Italians and who live there and who know about the state of their country.
Right. Yeah. No, I actually watched. I think it was the last episode or the one before that. So
right.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, Alexander. I mean, the thing is, I mean, people vote in sort of an anti-establishment, more right-leaning government with M5Fs and Lega, right? And the next thing you know, we're being governed by the exact same people who were voted out. And it's only a year or two later, and then not only that, they take it a step further, and then they install an EU bureaucrat. I mean, it blows my mind. I mean, I didn't even realize that anything like this was possible. So, I mean, that brings me into my next point. You were asking in the last in that episode with regards to Italy, why is it that Italians don't protest and so on? Well, this is why. Nothing changes. It doesn't matter. It feels like you're just trying to find an expression that is not too crass, but into the wind. I think if you know what I'm talking about, nothing changes. So what's the point of complaining? And that's unfortunately what's happened in Italy. And after 20 years of the country being decimated by Euro policies and the Euro itself, Italians have nothing left. I mean, there's nothing left, and it kind of scares me because I mean, I guess this is the global, this is the global sort of philosophy, right? So just beat them down, and then when they've
you will own nothing and be happy.
Right, right. Beat them down, and when they've got nothing left, then they'll just accept anything. So
yeah.
And it's scary to watch, and this whole thing with the green pass and all of that. I mean, it blows my mind that people don't realize. And I actually wanted to ask Alexander, what are your thoughts on the theory that, I mean, apart from making a ton of money from, I think Alex calls it the coof, what are your thoughts on the theory that perhaps this also sort of ties into an agenda where you get everybody hooked into a centralized system, this whole green pass concept, and you're basically at this point able to, basically change anybody's behavior at the flip of a button. I mean, people don't realize, but they could turn around tomorrow and say, okay, nobody's allowed in restaurants, and their little green pass suddenly goes red instead of green whenever they try to swipe at a restaurant, and it's game over. And it's just absolute control.
As I've said many times, I think that there are definitely people who have that agenda and who want to see it happen. I don't think they will ever achieve it. I think the world is far more complicated than they realize, and human beings are far more complicated and far more rebellious than they realize. But the damage they will do in the process of failing is going to be incalculable. So yes, I think that agenda is there. I think it is being promoted. I am sure it will fail. I'm sure it will fail catastrophically, and it will do enormous amount of damage in the meantime. And it will also, at the same time, destabilize, or could potentially destabilize, our political systems and, of course, our economies. So yes, those things do exist. Those ideas do exist. They are around. They're not, people's fantasies. And it's wrong to say that they are, but I don't think they will succeed.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear your optimism on that, because it's kind of difficult to be optimistic around these times. So, but I mean, leading into my final points, the whole US printing money and the Fed pretending there's nothing to see here in terms of inflation. Do you have any idea or any theories what they're doing? I mean, what is the point here? I mean, are we trying to destroy the dollar? What's going on?
I think some of the people who are doing this have actually come to believe that you can, in fact, print money like this, and that the world economic system today, the monetary system, makes it possible, and you can go on doing that indefinitely. In the early stages of these sort of episodes, before everything goes wrong, you will always find optimists who think like that. Right. So I think there are some people who really believe that. I think that there's also a political dimension in this, which is, as I said, a massive urge on the part of the people who are in power in Washington now to try and stimulate an economic boom so that they can be securely in power for the next 4 years. And they're not particularly worried about what goes on after those 4 years, because they think that during these 4 years, they will be able to to nail everything down in place within the United States, that what goes on after that isn't really going to concern them. I think they're completely wrong, but I think there is that view. And I think there are also some people who like money printing, because it is making them very rich. So you get all of these three things going on at the same time.
Right. Yep. Guys, I'm going to leave you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ruggero.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, let's bring in James. James, you with us?
I am indeed. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, James.
Oh, wonderful. I wanted to just talk about South Africa as well. And obviously the things that have been going on there recently. And I just was thinking about, the Black Economic Empowerment, the B program. And just wanted to talk about that. I mean, look, it's clearly apartheid created these sort of vast racial disparities, and it would be very difficult to resist implementing some kind of like redistributive program. Just that seems to be the reality, but like the kind of accelerated redistribution program that B has ended up being is almost, seems to me like it's never going to produce satisfactory results. It seemed pretty obvious it was always going to produce a sort of small, hyper-privileged black elite, a lot of capital flight, inefficiency, lots of emigration. And if there was any upward mobility of formerly marginalized groups, it would be governed by cronyism, while most blacks seem to remain poor. Which, it just seems like quite a predictable, I remember writing and talking about this in 2006. It's like, it was pretty obvious that yes, I can see the political imperative for this kind of program, but it was always going to end in some kind of disaster, because people always want more.
I agree. I mean, certainly something has gone radically wrong in South Africa, and I think you're pointing to a lot of the actual causes. I'm going to say straight away, I for one am on a learning curve with South Africa. It's not a country I've been very involved in for a long time. I mean, and it's a place I lost track of. But the more I've been learning about it, and from interactions with people like yourself, the more it seems to me that all the mistakes that were made are the kind of mistakes that you see being made all the time. And so you want to control companies, you put people from the ruling party on the board, you want to advance people through social mobility, you come up with these kind of systems. You don't actually look at society as a whole, try to work a system which is legally based, economically open, structured, effective, and one which provides opportunities. You try, in effect, to artificially create them through all these essentially administrative means, and the effect is always bad. I mean, it invariably goes wrong. It's based upon a misunderstanding of what people are like and how they are, and what incentivizes them and what doesn't. And you can end up incentivizing people in completely the wrong way if you take that kind of approach.
And I think it's interesting because a lot of I think what is not understood about South Africa, the white population of South Africa, is it's divided into sort of English descendant South Africans and Afrikaners. And the English South Africans were and remain sort of a wealthy, highly educated demographic. while the Afrikaner, there are more white Afrikaners, and they were the kind of I don't know, like in the old regime, they filled a lot of the lower, the lower bureaucratic roles in the apartheid government, and now they are the big losers from the post. The post. These are not particularly educated people, but now they get nothing. They get no support. There are lots of sort of Afrikaner beggars on the streets. And they get less than the poor black South African, which people could say, well, they were given a hand up in the past, but the thing is that the current government gets legitimacy from being better than the previous government and saying we are governing for all South Africans. We're not saying, but it seems like they're not doing that. I'm not putting the two governments on a moral equivalent. They're not, but it looks like the moral gap between the two, the old regime and the current government seems to be shrinking.
I understand you. I mean, what has happened is that it's just created another form of inequality. Now, it might not be the same kind of inequality as the one that you had under the old system, and I'm not justifying the old system at all. I mean, I actively campaigned against it in Britain. Yeah. But
nobody can justify it. It's not justifiable.
Exactly. But it's not the system that's been created now has not created equality, and it's not created a society that is happy and an economy which is strong. It has failed at everything in a way. So it's been an approach that hasn't succeeded, and which needs to be changed. The great problem for me is that I think it's become increasingly clear what is wrong, what has gone wrong in South Africa. I don't see political alternatives to the ruling party at the moment, which could take South Africa on a different course. And I mean, I was reading, I don't know whether you know Peter Hain or have heard of Peter Hain. He was a sort of hardy perennial. He was one of the big anti-apartheid activists in Britain through the 70s and the 80s. And then he became a minister in Blair's government and all the rest. But he was making out, well, it's all the fault of Zuma, and, Ramaphosa's going to come and he's going to sort things out. If only it were so. I think Mr. Ramaphosa is absolutely not going to sort things out, because it seems to me that the system is completely corrupted within the heart of the ruling party itself. And at the same time, for historical legacy reasons, perhaps, but also I'm sure for other ones, structural ones, administrative ones, it's this immovable object at the center of South Africa's power structure. And that makes change, positive change, extremely difficult.
And I think the other thing is like that, I guess what you would describe as black identity politics, to me, it seems it's always served Africa or post-colonial Africa poorly, because once the white population is sidelined, there is no black identity. It's just because several cultural, ethnic, tribal groups have similar colored skin means nothing.
This is something which, again, I'm not going to go into, because I don't have that depth of knowledge.
I'll just say like the one thing I'll say is that the settlement history of South Africa is quite complex. It's like, Europeans arrived and settled much of South Africa before the Bantu. Like the Khoisan are the native people of South Africa, and they are largely irrelevant demographic today. So the land seizures from white farmers are not a matter of returning stolen lands to dispossess former owners. I mean, so it's complicated. It's really complicated. I'll just end with one thing. In my own experience, I meet a lot of my colleagues in my work are Black Zimbabwean who have immigrated to Australia, and also a lot of white South Africans have immigrated to Australia. So I've come into contact with a lot of both, and it struck me that despite when those old regimes fell or whatever, that there were institutions in place which worked for those groups and which were brought over and they have some sort of legacy benefits that were able to be used in the new system for some period of time. And so for Mugabe before, his government educated a very large number of young, like black people in the 1980s. And
hello.
Are you there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
We're listening, James.
We're listening, James.
Educations. Are you there? They all got good educations, and they in Zimbabwe, and then all this all the trouble happened, and they left. They all immigrated, and that's the tragedy of it. Was that we benefit in Australia from this. They could have stayed in Zimbabwe and being great teachers and doctors and whatever, but because the situation in Zimbabwe became so bad, they left in the 1990s. This is very so common here. Like all the time, you meet people like this. And the other thing that's just one observation, and the other one is like a lot of white South Africans I meet. It's unusual. Oh, are you there?
Yeah, we can just hear you.
We're listening, James. We can hear you.
Sorry. I was just going to say that many South Africans who've moved to Australia, they're unusual in that they, not all, but a lot of them have made a sort of complete break with South Africa. Like they don't consider it home. Like they say they'll never return there with determination, and it's quite odd. Like because most immigrants regard their native land as home in some small way. But a lot of the South African immigrants like, nope, we're done, never going back.
Yeah,
which I find strange.
I've encountered that in Britain, by the way. I've encountered people in Britain who have basically cut their links with South Africa completely, which is a strange and sad thing in some ways. In many ways.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, James.
Thank you. You're very patient.
Thank you. Thank you, James.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you for your call. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Alexander, we have a call from, I believe, China.
Oh,
is correct.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we have Zahir. Let me see what's going on here. I think.
Hello.
But I don't know. Hello, peace.
Yeah.
Yes. Am I correct? Are you calling from?
I'm from China. 你好.
China. Okay, great.
你好,
What's
大家好.
How are you doing? What's your question? What's your comment?
Actually, I want to tell some people because my English is not so good. I actually want to tell you how Chinese people think about the international the ideologies and in fact, in our history, we never sought to invade or whatever in our history and in our culture. We always think that we have our individual reason, and in our is a group of people. We have like a similar thinking. When I was young, that's a very hard period of time because now I'm 40. I'm 40 years old, and when my father he raised me up with a little salary. Even he work a whole day, he cannot buy a coffee. And that time when I was in high school, I was never thinking about to join the Communist Party. That's because I'm not the kind of person who can have a strong principle. I don't want to be guided or be brainwashed. The Chinese Communist Party always tell you some principles, it's for sure, because we have a very complicated political system, and most students are really encouraged to join the Communist Party. But at that period of time, when I was young, I really think it's not free, at that moment. But after I grew older, and I feel that my life changed, with the government of Chinese Communist Party, and I feel the large change. my lifestyle, my life standard, and my all the friends around me, they have changed. We can buy car now. We can have a phone. We can have a better life standard than the past decades. So I think, and after I grew older, I become adult, and I feel it's really most of Chinese people don't want democracy. For us, it's a task. It's not means you have a power, but on the contrary, it's like you have a duty, because the duty of the Communist Party now for Chinese people is to take care of our citizens.
Yeah.
That's why now, after I get older, I voluntarily want to join the Communist Party, because I want to do something to help the society, to make people understand why the Communist Party is not a kind of aggressive political system.
Yeah.
We are in China. We are not so brainwashed. Most people don't care about politicals.
No.
Because if there's too many people have different opinions. They are not so wise and not rational like our leaders, our politicians. So because we have a large population, if we have too many opinions, our country will be separated, will be divided into small countries. I think that's why the West want to see. I mean, the politicians, not the normal people in the West. But I think lots of people in the West have a misunderstanding of China. Just like the people, I don't know his name. He told me, he says that if China enters into the space, then they will weaponize the space station. But in fact, I don't think it's possible, because in our culture, we always want to be on the moral ground, always be ruled. Our society has been influenced by the Confucianism for 5,000 years. I think in this culture, we don't have that kind of mind. So I think Putin has a very good metaphor that if you see the mirror, there's a bad guy. So I forget what the Putin says, but I really want to emphasize that in our culture, I think I hope more Western people can come to China to see in your eyes, not just to be brainwashed or be influenced by the propaganda. Because our Chinese people are so hospitality. We always welcome the foreign people to come to China to have a good trip, to enjoy, to see in the person. So that's what I think. And I think in future will be maybe for us, the democratic system, I think it's not well in China, because I think in our culture, the elite, only the elite can play important role in the political system. The normal person, if you don't have a very good, very good achievement, you cannot be a governor or be an officer. But unlike the democratic countries, they have election. But for our Chinese people, we are focused on our normal life. We don't think it's too much important for us to play a role in the political field. So that's our way of thinking. for us, the politicians are full of duty to take care of the normal person, to take care of our country and the citizens, and to have a very wise and knowledgeable mind. I think most of people in China cannot do that. So I think our have a different system, and I don't think it's a dictatorship or authoritarian.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
Well,
sorry, my English is not so good.
Your English is very clear. I followed you completely. And first of all, can I thank you very much for coming to this program and for stating your views so fully and so sincerely. Now, I'm going to make a few observations because I went to China. Firstly, I got the very clear impression when I was in China of the great pride the Chinese people rightly have, both in the history of their country, what it has achieved over the 5,000 years of its existence. And it's important to remember that China is the world's oldest continuous state. And secondly, of their great pride of what China has achieved over the last 40 years, which is indeed remarkable. That's one thing. The second thing I wanted to say is that I am absolutely no doubt at all that at this moment in time, most Chinese people, exactly as you say, support the government and the political system and feel that it is working well for China. That is the second thing. The third thing I want to say is that your point about China and Chinese civilization historically being profoundly peaceful and unaggressive, I think is true. One of the things that really struck me when I went to the Shanghai Museum of Art, and I'm always somebody who's interested in art, and went to the gallery and I looked at Chinese classical paintings, which always interested me greatly, is that there is one thing about Chinese painting, classical painting, which is unique. And that is that you will never find scenes of war or violence in them. They're landscapes, they're pictures, they're portraits of people, they're contemplations of flowers, of books, of all kinds of things. But you will never find depictions of war. Clearly, this is not something that Chinese people want to celebrate. And the last point I want to make is that the political system that China develops is entirely a matter for the Chinese people and for no one else. Those are all the things I want to say.
Thank you. Maybe I think it's time for me to hand over the mic to the next one. And I wish you have a good day and hope the pandemic pass as soon as possible in your countries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, peace. Thank you for calling. Take care. All right, Alexander, I think you have to go.
In a moment, yes.
Okay, we'll take Zahir. Zahir, real quick, if you're with us, and we'll end this. Zahir.
Oh. Well, I think we will have to give end it there. Well, this has been tremendous.
Yes, we'll end it there. Hopefully Zahir next time. Zarael says, my small support and thanks for your very well researched and done work. One of the best independent news channels on the planet, the Duran for the win, from Zariel. Thank you, Zariel, for also moderating. Thank you to Valies. Thank you to GEC. You guys are awesome. Thank you very, very much. We really, really appreciate it. And Adam came in with the last minute super chat, which says, recall election, 5 reps swing House, 1 Senate, 5 AZ, 6 Georgia Dem reps. Speaker needs a seat. Note if Trump moves to AZGA, Speaker impeached before 2022. Huge red wave, 2022. I think we are going to see a huge red wave, Alexander.
Yes, I rather think so too. That's my own view anyway.
Thank you guys for everything. Thank you guys for everything. I don't have anything else to add.
No,
Valies again.
Just to say
thank you,
thanks
Zariel.
again.
Thank you, GC. Yes. Thank you to our moderators. Thank you to everyone that called in. Thank you to all the super chats. Any final words, Alexander, before you depart? I know you've got
Well, I've got
more stuff to do.
More stuff to do.
The day never ends for the Oracle of London.
The day never ends. But it was a great program. We got so many questions and from so many people from so many places around the world, and that is very exciting and very wonderful. And let's continue to keep it like this. Let's have people from all over the world coming and asking us questions and interacting with us and each other in this way.
All right, I'll end it on there. Take care, everybody.